social distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to Opcode Virtual Summit.
Hi everyone, and welcome back for second edition of the virtual summit of Opcode. So if there is any issue, let me know now so I can fix it. This is live, so doing the DJing in real time. Well, thanks again for joining us again today. Like I was saying last time, I was not sure to do a second one, and there is a second one. This time, this is pretty much sure that we're also gonna have a third one. So this is something that's gonna be pretty recurring. The period of two weeks between like each edition has nothing to do with the confinement extension that keeps being increased of 2 weeks every 2 weeks. But that's an interesting coincidence, if you're all wondering. So let's check what's gonna be our agenda today. So before we start, like I was saying basically last time, but before we used to be a physical conference, and 2 weeks ago we did our first like virtual summit. And for that, you know, like if you have any questions, because this is live, you can just like drop a comment in the YouTube chat, or also on Twitter if you're using the hashtag Opcode2020. It should also appear in the corner. It's all working well. Thank you, Laura. Like I appreciate it. We have a lot of people actually watching from a bit everywhere. So we have people from Kenya. I think we also gonna have some people from Ghana and Ivory Coast also watching. It's a great opportunity, at least now that you can attend conferences without having to go to the US, and frankly, even from Middle East or Europe, you know, it's always a long flight to go to the US or to travel around. And it's always like very time consuming to do all that travel. So at least that's one good thing that comes out from the confinement. If you want to join the IRC channel, we also have an IRC server. You're more than welcome to join it. And as usual, so the slides will be available on GitHub. And right after the conference, they should be online. And I think last time also someone was asking if we're gonna cut each presentation. So we will cut it, and we'll like extract them out. But the live like stream will be available anyway right after. And that's it for today. Before we start looking at the agenda, a small public announcement. So we also partnered at Come with Tetris because they have their own EDR and they make it available to all hospitals. So Tetris is a French cybersecurity company, so we partner with them to assist like hospitals for free. This is part of an initiative launched by OVH called Open Solidarity. And if you haven't checked it out yet, you should also go on the CTI League website. So this is the Counter Threat Intelligence League. And because of the pandemic, obviously there is also a lot of cyber attacks, as we all know, that are like proliferating right and left. So the CTI League is basically like focusing on helping companies by like gathering people for like to monitor disinformation, incident responders, and security experts. I'm sure like more will come about it, because this is a very recent initiative, but definitely something you should keep an eye on. And if you know like any medical institution having troubles and want to reach out, so you can either like check out the Open Solidarity or like the CTI League. And if you have any question, you can just send us an email directly. So our agenda for today, we're gonna have Ryan Naren, who is Director of Security Strategy at Intel, who's gonna give us a keynote about the cycle of innovation. So that should be pretty interesting. I'm looking forward that keynote. I mean, maybe Ryan will tell the background story, but this is actually the third time I'm inviting him for an Opcode keynote. The first two times, unfortunately, he could not make it, but I'm glad that at least this time he can make it. And following the keynote, we're gonna have a discussion panel with Grok, who does not need an introduction, and Sarah Jen Terp from the Cognitive Security Group. So they've been doing a lot of work on misinformation. And Brian Pendleton, also who is a visiting professor, also like specialize in misinformation, and we're gonna discuss what's going on with disinformation now, or complexities, and that it's not only like Twitter bot and just like Facebook ads. And after that, we're gonna have Kostin from Kaspersky from the Great team, who is gonna be speaking about how you can tap your own home network. Since everyone is working remotely from home now, you can be sure that a lot of APT groups are also gonna change their strategy in how they're gonna be targeting people. And even with enterprise, like people working from home will also very likely be compromised. So that should be like pretty interesting also. And last but not least, after all the buzz that happened around Zoom and security vulnerabilities last week, so Patrick accepted to give a presentation about his latest blog post to explain what was going on with Zoom, the vulnerabilities he has found, and I think they were patched quite quickly by Zoom. So that's also should be like very interesting. Let me check. So now I think we can get ready, Ryan. I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah. See your. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me, Ryan? No. I think Ryan went to warm up some tea. Well,
I can hear you, Matt. Am I up now?
Yeah, you can.
This is the first time I'm hearing you in the Zoom, so it's a little complicated trying to listen in another machine that's way behind. So.
Oh, okay, yeah, no worries.
Am I up now?
Yeah, you can share your screen now, and I will just put you next.
Can you tell me when I'm live?
You are now.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good night, wherever you are. I hope that you're wearing a mask and locked in, staying safe, checking on your neighbors, checking on the elderly. Matt called this a keynote. He's been trying to get me to come out to OpCode in Dubai for a keynote for a long time. I don't believe in keynotes. I hate that word. First of all, I don't belong on the stage with the Grog, Sarah Jane, Kostin, and Patrick Wardle. But I did have a really interesting experience recently in San Francisco that tripped my mind into thinking about the way security is handling its generational handoff. Security has grown up. It's time for a generational handoff, and we seem to be muffing it. And there's some implications for it for cybersecurity. So I wanted to just kind of share my shower thoughts on this. Not in a keynote format. Don't expect to learn anything. I'm not going to release anything groundbreaking. This is just to get your mind wrapped around thinking about how you fit into the security industry. And if you're a security leader, how do you embrace the next generation within this context of what I'll talk about, this cycle of innovation. So my name is Ryan Narayan. I work on security strategy at Intel. Prior to this, I was a security journalist for many years, working at eWeek, ZDNet. I created ThreatPost when I went over the Kaspersky lab. And I worked at Kaspersky managing the security research team in the US. Strongly recommend the presentation coming up later by Kostin Raju, who used to be my manager. I saw this research in action when he first started it, and I can highly recommend it. All right, let's get into it. So I was in San Francisco for RSA, and on the Monday of RSA, I had a CISO on conference type event I was doing, hanging out with some CISOs and sharing experiences and sharing war stories. And someone asked me to if I had a tweezer, and I was like, no, I don't. What am I going to do with a tweezer? So on the way to the conference, I stopped at Walgreens. So in the US, Walgreens is one of those big, massive drugstores that are on every other corner here. And I went in there to buy a tweezer, and I know nothing about tweezers. So I'm in the section with the tweezers, and there's this lady who's trying to help me understand what tweezers are. And she's giving me the history of tweezers, and she's helping me understand what types there are and why I need this type and that type. And I'm inundated with information. And it dawned on me right there and then that, oh my God, this woman who doesn't have any interest or any, she has no, selling this tweezer isn't going to make or break her day or her life. But she did spend a good 5 to 10 minutes telling me about the different types of tweezers and so on. And it was a really fascinating conversation and really a pleasant, kind experience. And I walked out of there thinking to myself, what am I going to do with all this tweezer information? This woman was really, really kind and wanted to make sure I knew everything I wanted, everything I needed to know before I bought my tweezer. So I figured out, what am I going to do with this tweezer information? I'll share it with you. So here's a quick side note that has nothing to do with this talk. There are 6 main types of tweezers. There's all kinds of tweezers. There's a unique use for each type of tweezer. You have to choose wisely. So this woman went on and on telling me about all these things, just genuinely interested in my curiosity about this topic. And the most important lesson I got there is not just learning about tweezers, but I learned about her patience, her consideration, her kindness, and the empathy she had for transferring this knowledge she had. She genuinely wanted me to learn about tweezers, knowing fully well that I had very, very little interest in really, really knowing about tweezers. And what does this have to do with security? I walked out of there thinking to myself, what if we all adopted the attitude of someone selling a tweezer and genuinely wanted to share everything we knew with someone else, even though they Matt, can you hear me? Are the slides moving? Because I'm looking at the YouTube feed and it's way, way behind. There we are. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll just ignore that screen then. Sorry, guys. So what does this have to do with security? I wanted to point out a couple of dates to you. The first cybersecurity patent was issued in 1983. MIT was granted this patent for cryptographic communication system. Gosh, DEF CON dates back to 1993. Jeff Moss did DEF CON in 1993. That's almost 30 years ago. FRAC 49, one of the most famous FRAC issues, was published in 1996. That's the one with smashing the stack for fun and profit. The first introduction to, memory, buffer overflow, memory corruption, exploitation. SSL protocol, which actually gave us the internet protocol that made it safe for us to do basic things like shopping online security, was released in 1995. If you look around, they're now writing books about the CDC and Loft. All those little researchers and young researchers that I covered as a security reporter back in the days, they're now CISOs, global security leaders, running major, major things. My point is, security has reached that tipping point where in the 1990s, when DEF CON was emerging and FRAC was emerging and SSL gave us safe online browsing, that was a generation ago. It was a generation ago, and those folks who created and kind of built the foundation for it have either moved on, they've aged out, or they're sticking around. And now what I find is that there's a fantastic tension existing now between generations as we figure out this cycle of innovation. So now that security has grown up, I wanted to share one of the most fascinating articles I've read on this cycle of innovation. And I copied and pasted everything verbatim here, just to be quite clear. And in this piece, Nick Hutton argues that to find the next big thing, you have to go back to the future. And he goes through this cycle of innovation. that starts with, applying technology to age-old problems. Smart people spend a lot of time, solution falls short, and this cycle. And the most important part here is that this takes about 20 to 30 years, this kind of interest cooling. It all kind of fits perfectly within this period of a career. This attempt to fail, stigmatized, the decay curve that, the new generation perhaps doesn't feel the stigma, but this 20 to 30 year cycle just keeps appearing and reappearing. We're at the 25, 30 year mark. We're right at that point where there's a generation handoff that's looming. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these tensions I'm noticing in this generational handoff. A couple of things to keep in mind is some just basic check 1 2. Sorry, Matt. A couple of things to keep in mind is just what's happening with generations. There's an older generation that's living longer. Technology has expanded. Digital revolution and evolution has kind of created more and more roles. So there's an older generation hanging on to security leadership roles longer and longer. There's a next generation of security leaders that are waiting their turn, but they're not quite happy about this kind of wait your turn thing. Because what they are running into is gatekeeping in not so subtle places, a lot of blocking out of non-traditional people, a lot of ageism exists on both sides, where the young folks think that the older folks are aged out and doesn't understand newer technologies. And on the other side, there's a lot of, we already solved that problem. We discussed that for years and years. And I see this happening on Twitter and on the public conversations all the time. Someone will post something on Twitter about a vulnerability responsible disclosure discussion, and the wrath of the older generation just bounces to remind them that we've had these conversations since the 1990s and the 2000s, and it's just this kind of gatekeeping ageism is just so destructive to what we're trying to do, that we need to understand that the size of these generations adds a really, really ominous wrinkle. And there's a coming generational leadership vacuum in technology, and more specifically in security. I wanted to share a quote from Gabrielle Bosch. It's a writer and a speaker who covers the millennial generation very well. And she makes the argument that there just aren't enough Generation Xers to take over from the older generation. And that means that many, many management positions will be empty, many more will be filled by people who are not properly prepared for this. And my argument is that at a time when these facts exist, we should do less and less about this gatekeeping and understand that as much as we contributed, when I say we, I'm talking about my generation contributed, we did okay. There's a lot for us to be proud of. The foundation of computing feels shaky, but it's there. It's there. We continue to do very, very crucial, important things with the technologies we built. You can go to the supermarket, look at your smartphone, click a button, stare at it, and then there's some biometrics magic that happens in the background that moves money from your bank to the retailer. That is a result of a lot of the, foundational technologies that we as an industry created and built. We had an opportunity to use the creation of smartphones and the emergence of the smartphone industry to rethink security, and we used it well. We created sandboxes, we created new models around app stores and code signing and so on. So there's a lot of innovators who moved the needle, and a shout out to them, but let's keep it real. If you look at Google's ODA tracker, memory corruption still dominates ODA exploitation. Again, Frog 49 was in 1996 when this was first raised. So we still have a lot of problems to solve. Every news publication has news of a data breach, and someday it's just so weary and tiresome now that sometimes I wonder if it's even worth reporting it. Ransomware attacks against hospitals, which is like the lowest of the low, still exist and still everywhere. They're now attacking critical infrastructure. Costin will talk about why he's looking for nation state attacks on his own network, because they're everywhere. So as much as there's a lot for us to be proud of as a generation, we haven't done half the amount of work that needs to be done, and there's still a ton to be done. And my point is that we need to, as an industry, remember the lessons I got from the tweezer lady, which was a lot of empathy and consideration for what I wanted, a lot of patience. And for me, my parting message to you is that a smooth handoff has to be crucial. We have to show empathy and consideration. We have to pursue, not wait for kids to ask us, but we need to, as adults, pursue mentorships and pursue finding apprentices for apprenticeships, be energized about sharing. We need to approach real, true, meaningful diversity that has meaning, and we need to understand what that word actually means. My suggestion is to start with gender. Andy Ellis was on my podcast recently talking about diversity, and his thing was, okay, gender is one that we can define pretty easily. Let's start there. Hire more women, invest in more young ladies in technology, invest in non-traditional geographies. Shout out to Matt Swish and Opcode for all the stuff they've done in this area, which is just fantastic and fascinating to me. If you can help locally in your area, do it. This handoff is happening as we speak. Security is older and getting into this place where we need to do this handoff. And it's crucial that we all play a role in understanding these generational shifts and habits. There's a lot, we can dig into. I don't know if that qualified as a keynote. Those were my shower thoughts on where we are as an industry and some worrying things that I'm noticing. Please remove your gatekeepers. Please embrace the kids. Please feel free to help the kids. It's important. My DMs are open. Reach out. If you can help as a mentor and as someone who can help with this generational handoff in a smoother way, please do. Thank you very much, Matt, for the opportunity to present to your audience. And everyone, please continue to wear your masks.
Thank you, Ryan.
Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Of course. I think the chat, if you guys have any question, you can ask now. But I think Brian had a question now. You can unmute yourself, Brian, if you want to discuss the thing about Generation X, because I don't want to paraphrase it improperly.
Yeah, I was just saying, as a Gen Xer and having lots of friends in that, I see a lot of them deciding they don't want management positions. They have decided, hey, if you've held out this long on me, just give it to the next person. I'm going to go on and do something else.
There is a lot of that happening, and that's what's leading to this paucity of leadership that's coming. There's just not enough Gen Xers to take the spaces. So in reality, there's no other option, right? I mean, but if your argument is that Gen Xers are turning away from leadership roles and passing it along, then that adds another layer of another wrinkle on top of it. I don't know that that's happening.
Well, also you have to keep in mind that because I know when I first moved to the US, it was a big shock. It's like most of tech companies, and you have two tracks. They have a technical track and a management track. So you can still stay technical and be like an IC or still be a distinguished engineer. Whereas in France, it's almost impossible. You have to become a manager after. You cannot stay an engineer all your life. So
I'd be interested to see how that happens culturally across the world as well, because I agree with you about that happening in the US.
Yeah.
What I do find, though, is that there's a lot of, like I mentioned in my talk, a lot of the folks I wrote about as security researchers back in the day are now CISOs. You look around and you look at Charlie is running security at Cruise. Dino is doing security at Square. Windows Snyder is at Square. There's a bunch of these guys who have taken on a lot of these leadership roles, and I think there's more of an interest in that happening.
Yeah, this is true.
Can you read the questions if there are any, because I can't scroll through the chat.
Yeah, no, I will read the questions. So far there is no question, but for those who are not familiar with Ryan, I would say 15 years ago, Ryan was one of the top cybersecurity journalists. So that's why he says a lot of them now became like CISOs or have like executive positions now. But like you said, I think it's very important to that like the new generation to not be afraid of gatekeepers and to express their thoughts. I was a bit surprised also when you said like a lot of them are scared to like, to publish something on Twitter, even about bug bounties or full disclosure, because they're afraid of people saying, oh yeah, we covered that like 10, 15 years ago. So because of that, they will not.
There's a massive culture clash between the old school hackers and the quote unquote bug bounty kids who are doing cross-site scripting and so on. There's just a what is the word? It's not necessarily a culture clash, but it's just like a disrespect. The older folks just have no respect for these kids doing XSS. Meanwhile, that's where all the breaches are happening. So there's this, I don't know, it bothers me. It bothers me to go online and see someone from the next generation, a younger generation, asking a very, very valid question and just get constantly pounded because the question may have been answered 17 years ago by someone on a paper somewhere. Like, that's just distressing attitudes. And that's what I'm calling attention to. If you go on Twitter and you see someone asking what, in your opinion, is a dumb question, take a deep breath, walk away, get some coffee, and just like scroll to the next tweet. You don't need to bombard these kids with your, dismissive attitudes. That's kind of my big beef these days.
Yeah, that speaks to something else as well, in that as a community, we have done very, very poorly in organizing and making the corpus of information we've developed over the decades available to people in a clear way. So, it might have been something that was covered in a paper 17 years ago, and everyone that was around 17 years ago remembers it because it's famous, but everyone that's around from 15 years on has no idea. And that's a failure we have to own. Like, we have completely failed to create a library and a corpus of like, these are things that you should know about because it will help you. Like, we've put in the work already. Like, here are the shoulders of giants, go and see further.
It's a fair point. That's actually, there's two people in the chat asking like, is this a problem with our own keeping of history, and is there a website or collection of links that anyone can recommend with a lot of informative content? But yeah, like Jon Snow is definitely right. We definitely did a poor job at keeping like and archiving everything. But yeah, that's.
We have an opportunity to fix things too. Let's just not beat up ourselves. Like, we live in interesting times right now. We're almost at a restart spot. We have an opportunity to start locally, start small, do things right, use these times to think positively and be more aggressive in fixing the things that we see as problems instead of constantly talking about problems.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, I don't think there's any more questions. Well, thanks for your presentation, Ryan. I hope it's gonna motivate a lot of people to carry on and to keep learning and to not get discouraged, because we had this discussion a few times with some friends. Now, if you start hacking now, it's not like back in the when you had Windows 2000, where you could just like learn like few things there and there, and there's like so much information and so many things to learn at the same time that it's very like difficult to know like where you can start. So I think it's important to remind people to stay like motivated. But yeah, well, thanks again, Ryan, and so
Absolutely.
don't forget to send me your slides so I can put them on GitHub after. And yeah, like just a short intermission, and we will continue with our next presentation, which is going to be our panel discussion.
Social distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to OpCode Virtual Summit.
And we are back. So thanks for staying with us. I hope you enjoy that keynote from Ryan. So for our next presentation, like I was saying, we're going to be discussing disinformation. And as we have learned now with Ryan, hackers are pretty bad at documentation. And imagine that's when we didn't really have much information on internet. So now that there is like so much information, obviously, and in the middle of that pandemic, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation. We'll also see the difference between the two after during our panel. And yeah, like I guess we can start. So let me. Can you hear me, Sarah, Greg, and Brian?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. And
Yes, that is Asgard in the background.
nice.
Eek.
Let me move this here. Move that here. Okay, all good. So, yeah, I guess we can start. Well, who wants to start the conversation? Sarah, Brian, Greg? Which
I
key
always
point?
defer to Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, you by default.
Okay, so
Yeah, I suppose we better get the elephant out of the room first. Let's have the fight about what disinformation is.
I think we should open with what we're going to be covering,
Oh, okay.
and then
Go on, Jake. You do it.
yeah, fine. Okay, so the panel is called Disinformation About Disinformation, and essentially what we want to do is we want to broaden people's understanding of what disinformation is, because it seems quite a lot of the attention these days is focused on things like Twitter bots or Facebook pages. And there's really just a huge amount out there that is sort of much more important in terms of actually driving how people perceive the world. So we're going to be covering how misinformation and disinformation are not a limited phenomenon exclusive to Russia or China, and that a huge amount of disinformation does not even touch social media, that it actually comes from authorities, celebrities, and the media. So
And
we will
corporations.
start up, and corporations. So we will start out by beating up on Brian about the definition of misinformation.
Sorry. Welcome to our virtual sitting room where we just have a chat about things between ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Sarah?
Yeah, the discussion we generally have is, there are whole committees dedicated to defining what disinformation and misinformation are. I spent half my life avoiding being on those committees. So generally what we do is we just say, okay, here's a working definition. There it is. Now we go do the shit we need to do. So what we've done typically is said that misinformation is false content, whether it's text or images, it's information of some form. That's false. It's not necessarily malicious. It might be my grandmother not knowing what my favorite color is. It's people innocently passing on stuff that they don't know is false. Whereas disinformation has two parts to it. It's a sense of intent that it's deliberately put out to be false, but that also it's beyond just the content. It's the falsehood may not be in the content at all. You can have a disinformation campaign with completely true information. We've seen a lot of disinformation campaigns focused on African Americans and Black communities in other countries, where the information presented is completely true. It's just amplified. The amplification itself is false. The groups that are set up are false. The users who are pushing out that information are false. So falsehoods are elsewhere in the production chains. That's where I come from on disinformation, misinformation. Yaga, your turn.
And we're similar on that. To me, and what I've always, the way I always define misinformation is falsehood, but it is completely unmalicious. So if your mother says something wrong because she read it someplace else, that's spreading misinformation. Disinformation is the originator of it and what their intent is. So that's where I really put it, is the disinformation is in the intent part more than anything else. Whereas the misinformation, hey, I just picked it up and I keep running with it, even until somebody tells me it's wrong. And then if I still keep running with it, now I'm part of the problem as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I think we actually just violently agreed. We've obviously been arguing about this enough now.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that everyone's on board, essentially disinformation is malicious with intent, and misinformation is just being wrong, intentionally or not. That's like, oh, what else?
But let me hop in one thing. One thing that Sarah said, I think, is absolutely right, and a lot of people don't understand this. A good disinformation campaign is 95% truth. A great disinformation campaign is completely true, and I've just changed up how the context is so that it is, you don't realize that, and you can even go verify that it's the truth, which reinforces the fact that, oh, I should believe this.
I mean, really, good disinformation campaigns are just really good advertising.
Yeah.
Marketing methods applied. Yes. That's why we used marketing models originally in the AMET frameworks. That's why we fed them in. Sorry, G, your turn.
No, I was just going to say, like, if you look at pretty much anyone who's put together laws of propaganda, they will almost always say, do not lie. Like, if you can avoid it, do not lie, and never lie by accident. You know, the more truth you have, the better. So, you know, from Goebbels saying, you know, do not lie, to the British propaganda committees saying, you know, we will use the truth exclusively unless, you know, it's to our benefit to not do that. Even black propaganda was almost exclusively truth-based. It's far more powerful to give someone the truth, even if it's just a subset. That's usually a very good way of doing it, is to just a partial truth is sufficient. And then as long as you frame it the right way, it can carry over literally everything you want. Like,
if you think about things like cheap fakes versus deep fakes, I mean, it's, you know, quite often a cheap fake, just using a real video and messing with it is more effective than taking the time to build something.
Yeah, just to build on Ryan's point, I've written about this extensively. So the thing I want to move on to is, like, right now, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but we're kind of in this pandemic time. And one of the things that happens during a pandemic is my dog goes crazy and tries to break into my room. But the other thing is, like, because pandemics are, on the one hand, they're sort of starved for news, and on the other hand, they're full of bad news. So they become a very fertile environment for rumors, because pretty much, you know, everyone likes to feel that they know something and they can share something new with other people. So it makes rumors spread very well. And in a time of widespread fear, there's, you know, a lot of space for people to come up with things that are, you know, they're terrifying or they sound good or so on. So the thing I wanted to bring up here is how are rumors about COVID going around? Like we've got that huge list, Sarah, that
Yeah, we've got a few lists now.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we've been doing is Cogs at CoLab have been collating all of the other lists of COVID-19 narratives. So narratives are the stories that people tell. I guess we've got to explain that bit too. So what we tend to see is campaigns. So you see these large scale events or these large scale things that are being pushed. MH19, there are lots of disinformation instance around that. So you see a campaign with instance within it. COVID-19, there are lots of smaller instances within that. And most of the instances have some form of narrative, some form of story, some form of meme that they sit on. So, and those memes underneath that, then you see the messages, you see the fake users, you see the fake linkages, you see the fake groups, all the things that you see as I'm a data scientist, so I see as a data scientist. But if you want to start dealing with these, you need to start tracking at the narrative level. So we've been collecting up lists of narratives, and some of them are pretty wonderfully crazy. There's lots of sort of China narratives, there's lots of health narratives. One of the reasons that you get these is because there are information vacuums. So where there isn't good, reliable information at the top in a country, or there isn't a trusted source or set of trusted sources, then the bad guys will just step into that, throw data in. Either geopolitical aims, money aims. Let me go hunt some of these down whilst we talk amongst ourselves. Yeah.
So like one point I had is that like basically China and Russia have not killed anyone with disinformation, but Trump has. His big thing on chloroquine led to at least 2 people ingesting like basically a compound meant for fish, not for human consumption. And it was a husband and wife. The husband died and the wife ended up basically being in ICU, saying, don't trust anyone, not even the president, which, to be fair, seems like something that you would have figured out in 2016, but here we are. So, like disinformation, and I'm going to class that as disinformation rather than misinformation, because I don't think he does anything that isn't malicious. Like disinformation can come from anywhere. And right now, a lot of it is coming from the top. Like it is coming from media sources or from companies or from politicians, and that makes it particularly insidious because it's very hard to push back against. Like if it was just Twitter bots, it would be easy. We could deplatform the Twitter bots. But when you have governors saying that they don't really need to do anything because they don't really believe that COVID-19 is a threat, it's much, much harder to counter that.
Well, there have been long-running pipelines as well. So we've been watching for years now, stuff starting up in the channels, moving through into the mainstream media, and then straight through the top levels back to public. So there are whole flows here to be dealt with. It's not just like a simple take out the bots and you're good.
Right.
But I guess this is the point of our discussion, really.
Well, and as we talked about before this, yes, there is sources of disinformation, misinformation coming from, say, New York Times. We talked about that. But like I said, where do we expect them to step up and actually say, these people are wrong. It's very hard for one entity to, that's the size of New York Times, to flat out say the president is wrong, don't follow him, follow us, because it could very easily be looked at as, now I'm going to be a source of misinformation or disinformation.
Yeah, I mean, the politics of it is hard. And then you have the, and now I find the truth. And we're seeing more groups. So the WHO has its own list of rumors and counters and true facts. But there are groups that have run through disasters for quite a long time. So FEMA's run it way back. Hurricane lists of rumors. BuzzFeed has done this for a long time. Now we're seeing the big orgs like WHO. We're seeing, I think Maryland just stood up an information bureau. So we're starting to see that state level coming back. I don't know if we're going to get to a decent information bureau for the US, but this isn't just a US problem. We're dealing with information vacuums and a bunch of bad guys trying to lever into those vacuums at the same time.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was going to say is you've brought up WHO, and right now they've had a little bit of a credibility problem this year because they have made some possibly honest errors, but also the things like where they have erased Taiwan, first ignoring the warning of human-to-human transmission, and then the fairly famous video of the WHO representative basically pretending that they didn't hear a question about Taiwan and then logging off and so on. So they're struggling a little bit with credibility, and I believe it was, well, for me it was earlier today, but I think in the US it was yesterday, Trump has now started to directly attack WHO, which is going to cause, I would suspect, that's his overt message to the various amplification channels to start generating their own, what did WHO know and when did they know it? How corrupt are WHO? All of these other conspiracies and so on are going to be generated out of people taking their cue from that. And it's going to have a knock-on effect just because that's how the information world works. If you create enough smoke, people suspect that there must be some fire somewhere.
I think the truth is, the truth has always been a casualty of politics. And it's, political spin has existed as long as I guess we've had humans.
Well, and that's why, our topic is disinformation isn't just all these other big sources. And what I try to focus on more is local disinformation, and a lot of what we say at like local levels. Take a look at local political campaigns, and this is across the world. What we call mudslinging are lies. But we just get into this habit of people going, oh, I understand what that is. But what it does is it makes you more susceptible to other types. You get used to that, and you just start believing it is okay to do this. Or if it's your cause, your politician, your whatever, you think it is okay to do that as long as it meets your needs.
But you also get societies where caveat emptor holds. You don't get, where I come from, I'm obviously not American. We have the Advertising Standards Association. There's actually a body set up to keep advertisers truthful. I'm not really seeing an equivalent here. So how do you expect truthfulness to happen in a society where that isn't an expectation in the first place?
Well, the problem there is Americans are really big on the First Amendment. And so, to be fair, yes, free speech, absolutely a great thing, but that's a very broad, general, principle. And when it gets down to like the nuts and bolts, and it means things like free speech means that you're allowed to lie about things. Okay, that's fair, but you know, we do actually have rules about stuff. Like you're not allowed to lie that you know, this mercury-based drink is going to cure all of your problems. Therefore, drink mercury. You know, like if you tried to advertise that, you would be shut down very hard. You know, you're not allowed to sell quack medicines. You are limited in things like what you can claim about foods, right? So you can't say like this is a fat-free food if it's actually full of fat. Like, you know, you have free speech, but there are rules. So it would be entirely possible to put rules in place that say like if you are advertising something, you know, not just that people eat, but like if you're advertising things, you're not really allowed to lie. Like you're only allowed to lie a little bit.
Well, one of the baseline lies is this product will make you sexy. You know,
Well, no, and that's the truth. And this is something, not just the US, this is worldwide. We have become used to advertising. And that it also makes us very susceptible, in my opinion, to these disinformation and misinformation, because every bit of advertising at a certain level is a little bit of misinformation.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that's related to that is if you look at you know, now there's a lot of companies that are being set up to do disinformation and misinformation campaigns. It's been commercialized, you know, like it's not just the IRA, there's a whole bunch of entities. And when you look at them, you know, like they're run by PR people, they're run by ad people, you know, they're run by the experts in, you know, marketing lies to people.
isn't that the roots of the IRA too? I mean, that started as commercial.
Yeah.
So
Well, you definitely made a point I was going to, and that's that you can take a look at a lot of the masterminds behind campaigns going on right now, and they are PR people, advertising people, because they understand they understand how to get people's attention and keep it focused on their message.
well, you're also talking, I mean, it's not just focus on message, but you're in-group, out-grouping as well. So some of this, again, is about this narrative. Some of the narratives that people have are the stories about who you are and who you belong to, and also who you don't belong to. So a lot of the interesting campaigns have been the ones that have been creating splits and creating chaos. It's not even about getting people to believe stuff. It's just about getting them to not like the guy over there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And before we go into splitting groups, which I'd love to talk about, I just want to bring up that actually a very fascinating look at how, I'm sorry, I just read the line that someone put in the note that said BJ in intensive care. And I thought that's a brilliant idea until I realized it means Boris Johnson.
Yeah, Prime Minister, England. Yes, is.
Yes. Okay. Sorry.
I know what you were thinking, Druck.
I think everyone does.
Yeah, you can take the guy out of the brothel. Anyway.
Look, so one of the fascinating things is that actually, like, the reason that Fox News and the sort of extreme right-wing media machine exists is that during the 80s, there was this move of identity politics that Rush Limbaugh basically started with his AM talk radio show. And that brought together like Christians, like Southern racists, and some other right-wing conservative groups. And that suddenly actually created a advertising market, right? Like previously you'd have to have a different way of marketing to those separate groups. But now from a advertising point of view, they were all collected in one place. So they were easier to target with marketing and ads. And that created that put money into the space, and therefore more people got in. There was a need for more people to do this. And most of it started out not necessarily as right-wing perspectives of, you know, let's do deep policy analysis of how we can reduce government to improve, you know, efficiency and blah, blah, blah. It was identity politics, right? They're creating like, this is our identity. And that has increased over time. So it has become very much an identity statement. And that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been a corresponding left-wing media empire, because you already have an identity as the left-wing. You're someone who does not watch Fox, right? You don't need to be someone who does watch another thing. You simply have to be someone who doesn't watch Fox. So it's, you know, it's again an interesting thing about how there's in-groups and out-groups, and simply having identifiers for that can be sufficient to enable, it can draw from disinformation, and it can enable disinformation and misinformation going forward. But let's talk about splitting people up, because that is awesome.
Well, can I add on to something about that? A quick story.
No, no.
Yeah.
I'm shutting you down.
No. In the early 90s, a friend of mine and I drove to work together, had lunch, and this was over a summer. We were kind of working outside, and during the while we were eating lunch, we listened to Rush Limbaugh. I went the whole summer listening to Rush Limbaugh, laughing the whole time. At the end of the summer, I was, you know, talking to him. I was like, it sucks. I'm not going to listen to this because you have it on, but I'm not going to listen to this. And I go, and that's straight comedy. That's cool that they do this skit on AM radio. And he goes, it's not a skit. This is, and right then I was like, wait, this person really believes all this stuff. And he's like, yes. And it gets back to kind of the old thing about like Howard Stern. Why do you listen to him? Because I want to hear what he says. Why do the people who hate him listen to him? Because they want to hear what he says. And what it really hit me is, there was a long time ago, there was a possibility that someone that could have seen what was happening stopped it early, but we didn't. We just let everything go, and it just kept creeping up until now. Combating it is very hard, and we have to be on the lookout for the next Rush Limbaugh, left or right. We cannot allow things like that.
There's Gregor said just in the chat, there's a lot of left-wing media outlets. Yeah, I mean, there's disinformation there too. They're just kind of harder to get thick. And the other thing is, it's not just that show. I mean, part of this is Sinclair buying up a lot of outlets. You know, I spent last year driving all the way across America, listening to radio stations, and just hearing the same anti-left-wing stuff all over the country. It was really, really hard to find. I mean, I found one farm radio station in almost every state. I missed North Dakota. Sorry, North Dakota, but I did try to sample everywhere. So there's a sense that there just isn't the variety available in a lot of places. People are getting these single channels.
It's similar with the death of local news and the growth of national news. You know, people, like with the death of the local newspaper, basically all the information that's left is the stuff that comes from, you know, like Washington, New York, LA, you know, these or Chicago, like these major cities that can actually support a local newsroom that happens to be big enough to also be national. And as a result, you know, there isn't the local coverage that, you know, is actually necessary for a functioning society. Like, if you don't know what's going on locally, you don't really know what's actually going on in the places that affect you. Yeah, so
and that's actually one of the interesting deserts. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So there was some interesting work on pink slime sites. So it was local labs. So there were a set of right-wing biased local, in quotes, news sites set up all over the country, all over the US. Actually, they set up news sites, they set up sites per state, they set up sites for specific topics, including health. They set up some sites in different countries as well. But they were basically fake sites. They looked, if you didn't know, like a local site. And they just looked like a little local paper, but it was all syndicated, generated text, linked across to all of the other sites they owned. Plus, every so often there was a human putting in stuff which was either borderline or had some disinformation in it. And it was basically astroturfing on this massive scale. And when I talk about going into information vacuums, that's one of the things that was done, will be done. So yeah, it's an issue.
That's interesting, because the other thing is during 2016, during the US campaign, you know, the fake news that ended up becoming a catchword was primarily these sort of little WordPress sites that got set up as, you know, like you know, like the Dallas Underground Chronicle, or like the Denver Mile High, you know, Gazette. And you know, like they like they were all these small, like they appeared to be small local news sites, and you know, they weren't, because there was actually no newspaper there, but the visual trappings to make it look like a news site are, you know, trivial to create. And once that's done, it was easy to impersonate local news, because like local news carries things that isn't on the national news. We know that. So it is possible to believe that some local story hasn't been picked up elsewhere. So it helped the credibility there in appearing to be from a local news site. So yeah, like that, like local news is very interesting. And
but we've talked about this before. I mean, you can't, or I would say a great disinformation campaign has to bring in that local feel. Yes, you can. Yes, people will listen a little bit to stars and the president, whatever. But the biggest impact is making it appear that it is your neighbor, your postman, your preacher, your whatever, that is on board with this story or is relaying the story to you. It's so important to get that intimate connection to make this stuff work.
We're starting to see flyers again now. So we're starting to see physical flyers being put out, which is interesting. Haven't seen that for a bit.
I guess that's good for the local print communities, businesses, and kids who need jobs. I hope they're wearing masks when they go out and staying 6 feet away from each other and they're distributing. Damn, where were we? Something about local news. Oh, no. We were going to talk about splitting up groups, because this is the cool stuff. So like basically, because I've done a huge amount of research on this, like one of the important things about humans is that we have tribal identities or clans. Like we like to be part of groups. That's primarily how we identify. But people also have multiple identities. So you might be like, I'm a male, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a Cubs fan, I'm a Chicagoan, I'm, you know, ex-U Chicago. You know, there's a lot of different things that can be tribal identities, but depending on where you are, you'll have a different salient identity. You'll have a different identity that sort of comes up and dominates. So, you know, when you're at home, probably you're, you know, being a graduate of Chicago University is not your primary identity. Whereas if you go to your reunion, it would be. And if you're, watching a football, whatever, baseball, what do Cubs do? If you're watching a sports ball, yeah, if you're watching sports ball, then your Cubs fan identity might become your salient identity. And here, the thing that I want to get across is that because people have a huge number of these identities, an effective campaign can pick and isolate an identity that creates a tribal group that people have, and it can amplify that and create a salient identity, an important tribal identity out of that. And then essentially the most important thing to understand about tribal identities is not so much, we are Cubs fans. It's mostly that we are not fans of those other guys. And a huge amount of what defines tribal is the us versus them. So you end up with this great ability to fracture social groups if you can find at least two tribal groups within that larger social group and reinforce one identity. So
we had a really interesting thing back in 2016. So I was tracking with a Canadian disinformation. So we were pretty early on looking at disinformation coming through. And we watched what we think was the Russians repurpose American identity campaigns and put them straight into Canada as right-wing identity campaigns, but without actually bothering to change all of the American identity markers. So it was hilarious. It's like Eagles and God and Country and all the rest of it. But it seemed to work. I mean, they adapted after a while, but it was just like, how the hell did this work? Somehow it did. Somehow the messaging was like more stronger than the hilariousness of the hell, wrong country, dudes.
Enough repetition and it beats a person down.
Yeah, and the other thing is if a lot of messaging depends on how receptive people are. So if you're if you're neo-Nazi curious, then a neo-Nazi message, even if it's spelled with English spelling instead of American spelling, will resonate with you more than if you're somewhat skeptical of the neo-Nazi messaging in general. Then you'll notice things like, not only is this a completely garbage idea, they don't even spell right.
I try so hard not to call that pile curious.
Guys, let me ask Matt something real quick. Matt, we're on till 1:15? Because I have seen a few questions and I want to make sure that we get some. Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Well, as I was going to say, if there's questions, then Matt, if you can read them out.
Yeah, no worries. I actually had a question before. You say you collected a bunch of narratives and you're focusing on narratives mainly because there's too much information out there. Regarding the pandemic now, around how many narratives have you been identified?
Oh God, I mean, there are dozens of narratives at the moment going on around COVID. Let me look at one list. So the list coming out of the Carnegie Foundation has 163 narratives. Give you an idea of that. Coming out of EU versus Disinfo.
Maybe give some example narratives as well.
Oh,
I mean, is WHO one of the narrative, or?
WHO has a narrative list as well, so their narrative is a dozen or more.
Yeah.
Some
narratives are like that the coronavirus is a bioweapon.
Yeah.
And then variations are, it's a Chinese bioweapon, it's a CIA bioweapon, it's a Russian bioweapon.
It's an American bioweapon.
I like the Bill Gates bio theory that he
Yeah,
started.
it's just to promote the 7 factories that he's throwing up to work on.
Interesting.
I mean, this is why we talk about campaigns with incidents underneath, because some of these are just up and down very quickly. So, for instance, the one about Stafford Act being implemented, that happened about 3 weeks ago, and it just like turned up, disappeared. Everyone went on under stay at home, and it just wasn't useful anymore. Although we have seen flyers yesterday about those, so someone's trying to revive it a little, just reuse. And some are going to last longer. So, you know, all the ones about lockdown, they're done and gone. That's happened. So it's playing on people's fears at the time. So
someone in the chat is mentioning 5G also. Like 2 people actually mentioned like the 5G narrative, because that one I didn't see. Is it like a new one, or is it something that started with Huawei, for instance?
Oh, 5G has been going on forever.
Yeah.
I mean, the UK at the moment has managed to wrap 5G with coronavirus with anti-China. So there's a whole bunch of interesting narratives going on there around China is bad, therefore 5G is part of China, therefore 5G is bad, therefore let's burn some towers.
Yeah, and that's part of tribal identity as well, because it's got to, you know, we're scared. What's a good us versus them, and what's something we can do that's also kind of fun. And burning stuff is kind of fun, and you know, we are not China, so that's and you know, again, the UK happens to be pretty good on identity politics. Taking Brexit, for example, you know, and the cricket test, and all these other like, if there's ever been a country that knows how to create tribal groups,
sorry,
it's the English.
We done some very bad things. Steve asked about how we trace back the origin of a narrative. So I guess that's probably worth talking about as well. So
yes, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, you have generally, I mean, you have the top end and the bottom end. So we have something called the pyramid, which is at the top we have those campaigns, and then we have the incidents within the campaign. Then those incidents sit on narratives. The narratives sit on the artifacts, the messages, the users, so and the images, whatever other things we actually see online. So we'll see them. We'll see things starting to bubble up. There are a whole bunch of really useful sites for looking for those things bubbling up. And as you see phrases, words starting to come through, you start tracking back those phrases, words. You look at botnets that are known, look at what they're talking about. You look at connected actors, the ones that are starting to talk, and you track back in time. You track back across platforms. You can't do exact phrase matching as much anymore because those damn smart machine learning people get in the way. So you can do things like we were doing some latent Dirichlet analysis over the weekend, looking at what the clusters of topics were, which isn't, you're not grouping by words, so you're now grouping by which sets of messages are most connected to each other, and then looking at the words with a nose. And a lot of it is just really careful tracking. You're doing very, very similar things to OSINT. It's forensics. It's a combination of applying some algorithms and doing some detailed forensics. Okay, back to you, G.
Well, I was going to say, did you want to speak about Amit briefly? Like,
yeah, definitely, for tools
like
and frameworks.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, because this isn't just like sort of hand wavy stuff. SJ and Pablo, one of our colleagues who's not here, they put in considerable time to build a framework, and
you're a life, dude. So yeah, we spotted this a lot ahead of time. So a couple of years back, I started talking, you'll have seen me at a couple of conferences maybe. Hey Dragos, talking about the way that you can apply information security principles to misinformation, disinformation campaigns. And one of the things that we knew was needed was a way to share information rapidly about incidents as they emerge. So we started looking at frameworks, description frameworks. We looked for existing misinformation description frameworks, didn't find a lot. Department of Justice had something useful, but we looked at advertising frameworks, we looked at PSYOPs, we looked at all the military stuff that existed, and we looked at InfoSec frameworks, and we looked at cyclical ones, we looked at the stage-based ones, the kill chains, and we came up with a kill chain for disinformation called AMIT. We deliberately made it look very similar to the attack framework, and it's so similar that now MITRE is taking it off our hands and going to start managing it for us, which is yay, cool. And we now have a 12-stage model. So when we see an incident emerge, we're looking from the strategic planning level. So it starts with strategic planning, objective planning, through to a whole bunch of preparation steps where you're developing the people you need, you're finding your useful idiots, you're developing those fake accounts, you're developing the networks you need to push information through, you're developing the content you need to put on it. You're working out which channels you're putting it through, you're doing some micro-targeting if you want adverts, and then you start putting it out. You start doing fast leaks through things like journalists, you're doing baiting, you're putting out through botnets, you're putting it out en masse, and you've got the physical stuff where you're pushing to the physical. The leaflets are one, things like t-shirts are another one, but there's also things like you can use disinformation to create physical effects, like we've seen two opposing groups being given meeting protest places, times and places at the same place and time, to see if you could create a in real person conflict. And then you're seeing if you can keep this running. There's some M&E measure, effectiveness measures at the end, because if you're running a long campaign, you want to make the next one better. So basically, that's the model we have of what the bad guys are doing. And we use that model to look at the ways to counter. Underneath each of those, there's a set of techniques that we see are being used. So when we see an incident, we tag the techniques we've seen, we tag the artifacts we see in there, we tag the actors in there. So we have AMIT is now sitting in MISP. We've got it in sticks, so we carry it on sticks for threat intelligence. We have it in MISP to share. So we're talking to a few countries about this, who are trialing with us, us being the COGSAT collab, and it's how we make sense and how we track what's going on. So like I said, it was a year of our lives just getting the frameworks in place so that we could rapidly share, because we saw this coming. We knew that it would reach a point where you couldn't just do this by hand. Okay, G, back to you. I've done the sales pitch.
No, I was just saying, I was thinking like the two groups meeting up was actually the most successful physical event that those guys managed, but there's a lot of really fascinating stuff about that whole campaign. Like my firm belief is that they because they believed that the color revolutions were CIA events, they believed that the CIA had a capability to, spontaneously create these huge protests. Right? That somehow this was a thing that the CIA was able to do, and they wanted to replicate it. Like they wanted to say, we have the same capability that CIA has. We can create large protests. And so they tried multiple times in multiple different ways to get large groups of people to show up. And the closest it came was that one incident in Texas. And that didn't have the result that they were obviously looking for. And I think that they failed to realize that the color protests were not organized by CIA, a couple days in advance. Like they were not, they're not a CIA capability. And Americans are lazy as fuck, right? If you tell them to and America is big. So if you want a whole bunch of people that agree with you to go somewhere, the odds of them all being within, easy distance of each other is actually pretty low. Like you can probably find 1,000 people who agree with you in the US, but they're going to be, hundreds of miles from each other. And they're not going to want to travel, unless they're really, really dedicated, like Star Trek fans or something. They're not going to invest that much time and effort to show up somewhere. My favorite anecdote, by the way, out of 2016 is how basically every physical event was tracked down to at least one local news story, except in Florida. One of the things that the Russians had done was they had paid people via Fiverr to have a truck with a cage in the back and someone dressed as Hillary in an orange jumpsuit, right? Like locked up in the back of this cage in a truck. And they couldn't figure out which of 3 trucks with cages and Hillaries in orange jumpsuits was the one that was organized by the Russians and which of the other 2 were organized by locals. And I think that says a lot about just how much, othering has been done about the disinformation campaign and the misinformation campaigns that were happening, where a lot gets blamed on Russia. But if you look at this, they can't even tell which of these, anti-Hillary locker up props was the Russian one and which of the other, and which was indigenous. There's a huge amount that was actually local, and it's very, very hard to blame it on an external group, even though it's much, it feels better to do that than to admit that, the disinformation is coming from inside the house. So that was the comment I had on that, because you reminded me of the funny thing. Cool.
I have a quick question, actually, regarding the framework and the tools. Because we talk a lot about the disinformation and misinformation, but also online there's something I haven't seen people covering much is more regarding radicalization and online extremism. How would that register under disinformation and misinformation? Because even if you look at the data, I will take Facebook and Twitter as an example, because so far they're the only one releasing official reports. Obviously, Facebook is not releasing much details. Twitter is doing a bit of effort without giving much context, but for radicalization, is AMIT something that could be applied? And have you seen people doing work around it?
We certainly looked at radicalization as part of the development of AMIT, and we think you can. We included sales funnels. So it turns out the sales funnels are actually really useful for modeling radicalization. You have the same, people become aware, people become part of, then become transmitters of an idea, whether that idea is this product is wonderful or this right-wing idea is great. So yeah, I mean, we built it so it could be used for that. And we're linking up with the group that's handling some radicalization too. So we'll see. We'll give us a week, see how we're doing.
Okay.
Things are moving fast right now. We were planning to spend this year building up the tool chain, and we're now developing as we use.
Yeah, different roadmap.
Thank you, COVID.
On the plus side, everyone's got more time at home, so
Oh yeah.
we can focus on that.
Well, or less time if you have kids, like.
Well, if you don't have kids and you're in the CTI league and you want to come play in Disinformation, I'm there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to segue very badly because we were talking about physical things. I want to bring up the sort of the power plays like this, the geopolitical soft power moves that are going on now with COVID, because they're very interesting, and I'm not seeing analysis on them in the media. It's just more of a flat reporting of what's going on. So here I'm talking about things like Russia sending military trucks into Italy to help disinfect, China donating PPE and medical equipment to well, initially it was Italy, but I think the biggest one was when Cuomo came out and literally said, thank you to Jack Ma and Consul Wong and so on for helping us get masks and PPE. And these things where Russia and China are using aid to appear benevolent, and I mean, yes, they are in at least one way being benevolent, but it's not pure altruism. It's this sort of soft power play is the sort of thing that you would expect from the US, right? Like when the Ebola crisis happened, there wasn't, Russia sending military trucks to disinfect African villages and China sending plane loads of supplies. It was the US that did that. And now the US is literally having China send supplies directly to, the states, like individual states. And to me, it's absolutely amazing that these countries are able to exercise soft power inside the US. Does anyone have any comments?
Exactly. If there's a vacuum now and somebody is going to fill it.
I mean, we're looking at a world. I mean, but what I do in the rest of my time is things like map what happens if all the borders close and everyone stops sending food to each other. Who's suddenly going to be starving? And we're about to hit a world where COVID-19 is going to hit some countries a lot worse than others. If you think about it, 50% or 20% means 10% population being not to put a finer point on it, the projections for Haiti are 800,000 dead out of 11 million. And repeat that around the world. And you've got yourself a Cold War style race between countries to gain ground and support. And that's already happening, but it's happening in places we would never have dreamed. Italy for God's. NATO country, Europe, what the hell?
Okay, let's be fair. So First World War, Italy was with the British, right? Second World War, they were with the Germans. So Third World War, it's fair enough that they should be with the Russians this time.
Oh, don't.
I mean, we had them the other two world wars. We've done our bit. Someone else is stuck with them now.
Well, and the other day, I yes, like Haiti will be bad. We talk about these countries that are going to be hit. I keep waiting for the ball to drop in India. And
yeah, India's very much inside so far, but yeah, I mean it's a lot of displaced people. I mean, a lot of
Well,
food that didn't make it. Yeah.
A large population on top of each other, bad healthcare, and then if that happens, talk about being able to shift world power. I mean, Russia or China being right there and being able to not just really influence places with their soft power. It can be scary.
Not just soft power. I mean, at some point we'll probably end up in proxy wars.
Well,
yeah, and one of the scary things about the dynamic between India and China is that the Indians do, like, basically their entire espionage effort has been focused on Pakistan and things like that, and not on China. So they do not actually know what Chinese thinking is. They don't have insights from human sources that say, okay, yes, they're doing the saber rattling, but really, it's just for the internal market. You could ignore it.
Right.
They don't have those sources, so they don't have that insight. So they're kind of flying blind. They're in the same bucket as the rest of the public. So that has a very, very bad potential to go very badly wrong, simply because they lack visibility. I'm not sure the other way around. I think China probably has quite good visibility on India. At least, like, they've definitely hacked the shit out of them.
I've been pretty impressed by their intelligence gathering, yeah. But
oh yeah,
some of this is, some countries play the long game much, much longer than others.
But some countries are really good on the 24-hour cycle. Like the U.S., they're excellent on that immediate 24-hour, can't see past.
Well, the Brits have a saying: "A week is a long time in politics." It's depends on your scales. Depends on your plans. Depends on what you actually want to do geopolitically, and also on whether geopolitics is going to be the same. No, it's been territory based. Now is it moving to human based, personhood based?
Right.
Well, you've got geopolitics, you've got power, you've got money, the usual motivations. So, not sure.
I think it depends on where you look. Like it varies by country, and it also varies by topic. So it depends, and it varies by time. So when elections come up, obviously political disinformation campaigns ramp up a lot more than sort of in a lull when there's opportunities for other things.
But entrepreneurs are going to sit on back of it. So they're going to make money either running campaigns for other people or running their own sites. Anti-vax, I mean, they make a lot of money. So, you've got advertising, you've got merchandise, you've got,
Mm-hmm. So there's a suspicion that Trump has a financial interest, which is why he keeps pushing it. Like, that does appear to be true in a literal sense, but I support the theory that someone else put out, that he's literally just looking for a miracle cure to make this be over. Like, it's not so much that he expects to make money out of it. He just wants something to make this go away, because he's got nothing else that he can figure out what to do. So I think there's that. The other thing is that it came from, again, an information vacuum where basically in China they were trying literally everything, and these weren't randomized trials. These were people who were desperate, and they'd say, okay, well, we gave a whole bunch of different drugs to a bunch of different people, and some of them survived. Here are the things that we gave to people, and people sort of latched onto different ones. I mean, here in Thailand, for a while, they were saying that these HIV cocktail drugs were effective, and it wasn't necessarily that HIV cocktail drugs are effective. It's just they were throwing spaghetti at the wall. This was something that they tried, and the person recovered. So that's one data point. So I'm not sure it's driven by finances so much as it is by fear. Like, people are just desperate for something that will make this go away quickly. That's my suspicion.
And I do want to point out, I think it was either this morning or yesterday, that as much as he's pushing that, a doctor, I believe it is at the Mayo Clinic, sorry if I don't remember exactly correctly, was like, hey, but don't forget there are side effects to this drug. We need to be talking about that just as much. And it is amazing how it seemed like that story went and then just got shut down.
So I think we're on to our last points, aren't we, Matt?
Yep.
So, yeah. So yeah, which mentioned the point of across the kill chain.
Oh yeah, I mean basically that it's not just about taking down the bots. We have the kill chain, and we're building out counters across the whole of the kill chain. It's a lot more that we can actually do about disinformation campaigns than you think. And
regarding that point, because and I guess also one of the problem with that, the reason people think it's just like bots and Facebook and Twitter is also because they are the only one publishing some reports. I mean, if we can call them reports, even like Twitter recently for this month and last month, they just posted some tweets. They are not even writing blog posts anymore, which is a bit surprising. Do you think even those companies are even prepared internally, because it seems like there is also some blind spots if it's non-English content also? It seems like there is a huge focus on English content, and it sounds like even their team, well, I'm gonna take Twitter and Facebook as example again for companies, because they're the only one trying to do stuff, but even with them it sounds like their team are very small and they don't even have the I don't know, people speaking more language than English. I remember Greg, a few years back when we talked about Myanmar, it was a big problem for Facebook. And I think if I recall correctly, one of the main problem is that if it was not in English, a bit like the French police when there's terrorist attack, if it's not written in French, people get lost. Do you see any any strategy from a social media company or even news company about being able to analyze non-English content? Because obviously data and aggregation is very important, because that allows us to make some proper percentage on different things and statistics. But what about non-English content for that point?
It's not just non-English. It's also you have to localize. So I was working at GDI last year, and I was looking at disinformation in Kenya. I used to be a data director for a Kenyan company, so I had some idea of the data landscape there. But if you don't have people who live there, they can't tell you what disinformation is. They can't tell you what is normal information there. Yeah. So it becomes a lot harder if you don't have local people. Yeah. I mean, WhatsApp, I guess, is a good example, because a lot of local news get shared on WhatsApp, and the best that Facebook was able to do is to limit the number of time you can forward a message, and they're doing that only because of the pandemic, and it took them I don't know, many years, because we know that was a problem. They've done that in elections in the South American countries before. It's not.
And they also did that. Sorry. Yeah, and they also did that in India. So
it's country specific?
Yeah, like the Indian one they did because there were like race riots and people were getting killed. So, like that became important because they didn't want to be held liable for people dying, which incidentally is going to happen to Fox News because of all the disinformation they put out about COVID. There's been at least one person who has died who believed that the virus was a hoax. So Fox is lawyering up, and they're kind of scared of being sued for causing people to die because they were lying, which I think is kind of interesting. But in terms of language, I can say that basically the only thing I've seen aside from English is a lot of these places hired Russian speakers because they figured that having Russian speakers would be good for understanding what was happening with, IRA and Russian-based disinformation campaigns. And then they found out that it's not really that useful. I mean, like it's great, but that's not where most of the disinformation comes from. So I've seen that there are now a fair number of these people looking at disinformation campaigns in that are in the Russian language. But to be fair, literally everywhere that speaks Russian as at least a second language, they're pretty comfortable handling disinformation. Now, they have a fairly long history of dealing with disinformation. They're not looking for Americans to tell them that there's a bunch of Twitter bots promoting something. These people live through Pravda. They're good.
Yeah, I also I don't think we've seen much online report about India disinformation campaigns, like Twitter datasets that are like country specific. That they never release once about India.
If you want India, run rage is a person to track.
Sorry?
If you want India disinformation, Rung Rage is a good person to track.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, there is a bunch of them that are active. I'm just surprised that social media companies are not doing anything for that,
So I actually want to stop us there for a second because I want to pull us back on topic that it isn't Facebook, it isn't Twitter. That's the important stuff. I
of course.
will always go back that it is the local things that are most important. And I saw somebody post in there, critical thinking for the win. Critical thinking is important. But guess what? A good PSYOPer, which I used to be PSYOP, so I still call it PSYOP, can take your intelligence and use it against you. You can be brilliant, and I can still trick you. So don't, and part of it is that overconfidence that I'm too smart to fall for something, right? So emotion controls everything. And at the local level, that's where you get really emotional. Yes, at the top level you do, but when you're with your people, when you're with your tribe, that's when you're really emotional and you allow your intelligence to be subverted a bit.
Yeah, an excellent example of that is that there is a Russian-based disinformation group that puts out these propaganda videos on Twitter, and I hate to go back to social media when we're talking about this is not social media, but these propaganda videos are targeted at groups and tribes, and okay, like there's now this, which is not the Russian one, and they've created a sort of a visual format. There's a very stark white, black, yellow. That's their visual thing. And then there's like, I think the Russian one is like, this is now. It's very, very similar. It's designed to confuse people looking at it. They even use the same visual cues, but they put out.
I think they use the same music.
Yeah, like it looks very, very similar. Anyway, some of those videos have ripped through the InfoSec Twitter community, and we consider ourselves fairly smart. But when something shows up and you watch it and it just emotionally grabs you with basically a point of view that you agree with, right? Like the one I was thinking of was a police brutality thing, and it got huge traction. And afterwards I went through and I analyzed it, and I was like, oh my God, this is so flimsy and terrible. I can't imagine that anyone ever fell for it, but all of us did. So that's the thing, is it's not about being smart. All of this stuff is emotional, and I'm getting told I have to shut up.
And then, I mean, no, but we're gonna have to wrap up. I guess soon. Like, if there is any like conclusion points or anything like you want to close on. No, I guess now is the time. I don't see more questions from the chat either.
Just the same we started out with. It's that like social media is a distribution channel. It's not the end all and be all of disinformation. All of this anti-disinformation stuff that's going on, a lot of it that's just focused on taking down bots and things like that. It's missing the important stuff, and you can learn more about the important stuff by looking at Amit. And I believe we're putting out a counters document at some point. And you'll see that it's, like there's a lot of stages in that kill chain that are much more effective. And it would be good to go after those, not the final end target, just the messaging bit. So yeah, wrapping up, that's it. Like disinformation is everywhere, and
misinformation
not limited to social media.
Cool. Well, thanks to all of you, and thanks for your time. We're getting some positive feedback in the chat, so I'm sure it was really informative for a lot of people. It's going to be recorded, so that's good. Any other point you want to close on, Brian, Sarah?
No, good.
No,
I'm good.
Okay, perfect. Well,
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us today. And
thanks for having us, Matt.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. And we are back for more presentations. So thanks for staying with us. If you have any questions, you are more than welcome to ask them in the chat. I can always relay them. Some good points by Dragos, actually. We mentioned something about the IRC channel. So there is an IRC channel. As you can see, Dragos, I made a slide actually for it. You're more than welcome to join it. If you want to participate to the discussion on the YouTube chat, you're more than welcome to ask questions there. But also you can also ask your questions on Twitter and use the hashtag #OPCOD2020, or you can just be like Juan, who is gonna, post a bunch of tweets and abuse of the hashtag a bit, But we like him, so we won't we won't say anything. He was just excited to see Ryan speaking, and so we had the keynote, we had the discussion panel about disinformation, and now we're gonna switch to a more like technical part of the conference. We're gonna be speaking about how you can tap your own internet and then Zoom security. So, Costin, you can get ready, and I'm gonna launch the intermission while you can start sharing your screen.
Thank you. Can you hear me
Social
well?
distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to OPCODE Virtual Summit.
Check if you can hear me well.
Yeah, I'm just looking for your window here.
So 1 sec.
Can you share?
No, I'm
Can you
sharing
share
now.
your screen? Yeah.
I am now.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess okay. Bye, Greg. And bye, Sarah. Bye, Brian. Thank you. Just relaunch this. Okay, that's it. You can go ahead, Kostin. The scene is ready for you.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks everybody for staying through this very interesting discussion. There was a lot of talk about disinformation, and now we're going to talk a bit about the opposite, which is information. In particular, we're going to talk a bit about how to know more about the things which are happening in your network at home. And actually, the idea for this talk, it came to me in 2016 in January when Rob Joyce, who used to be the head of the Tailored Access Operations Group at the NSA, I think that he moved on, seems, to other positions, but he made a speech at the Usenix Enigma conference, and he said something very interesting that a lot of people already knew, but I guess that this was quite interesting confirmation of what we knew. And he said, I quote, "One of our worst nightmares is that out-of-band network tab that is really capturing all the data, understanding anomalous behavior that's going on, and someone paying attention to it. So you got to know your network, understand your network, because we are going to." Now, this was rather interesting from several points of view. In particular, for me, it was interesting because about, I guess, maybe 4 or 5 months before his talk, actually, I started tapping my home internet very much in the same way through an out-of-band network tap. And well, what does it mean? Well, in terms of network OPSEC, speaking from 2020, work from home, everybody is pretty much, I guess, stuck at home unless you guys are living in Sweden or Belarus or other countries which have, let's say, non-orthodox policy where it comes to social isolation. So as we're spending more and more time at home, maybe I would say it's interesting for you and for everybody to spend some time as well looking at your network traffic. And there's actually quite, let's say, a few good reasons for that. Now, speaking about the basics, and let's say threat modeling, let's think a bit about who are, let's say, the actors that you need to worry about. Well, the low profile actors are generally not a threat. So they will not be able to phish you or steal your credentials or maybe exploit you with a 2, 3, 5 years old exploit, because I guess everybody is by now patched. Um, on the other hand, pretty much all high profile actors, if they want, they can very easily infect you. And it's just a matter of cost justification. So if they can justify, let's say, spending $500,000 or $1 or $2 million on 0 days and using those 0 days on you, then I would say there's pretty much very little that you can do to stop them. So our assumption and objectives here would be that we are or will be infected, that this is just a fact. And we can't stop it because, again, it's just a matter of cost justification. And when this happens, what we actually want, we want to catch it. Now, remember that the infection is a matter of cost. And what we want to do, we'll try to increase the cost as much as possible. And the other thing to keep in mind is that routine is the opposite of security. So actually we want to keep changing our OPSEC, always adapting to the latest trends. And this is one of the things that I am doing myself, in case you're wondering. So today I'm just gonna speak about point number 1. And well, if I don't mess up things badly, maybe Matt will invite me in the future to speak about the other 2 points. But nevertheless, today we want to speak just about point number 1, which is how to monitor your home internet for APTs. Now, the reality is that the harder requirements for this task are, let's say, not that complicated. So what we need, obviously, is an Ethernet internet. It will be difficult, way more difficult to monitor fiber optic internet, but Ethernet internet can be quite easily monitored. And we'll need a hub or a smart switch, and we'll need a mini PC for this purpose as well. Now, for the Ethernet hub, you can still find them on eBay. Well, the sad part here is that you can't purchase them new anymore. I don't think that you can find these anymore. Still, you can find them on eBay for $10, $15. And keep in mind that a hub is not the same as a switch. A hub will just mirror the traffic through all the ports, and we're going to take advantage of that to monitor the internet traffic. Now, of course, I know what some of you will say. You'll say that we have gigabit at home, and don't worry, I've got you covered. Instead of a hub, you can actually use a smart switch. Switch for about $40. This is a gigabit switch with management. It is available pretty much everywhere. And there's also another option here, a Netgear switch, which pretty much can accomplish the same thing. So you want the smart managed versions of these routers, which have the ability to do port mirroring. So we're going to use port mirroring to replicate the internet traffic. Now, for the mini PC, you can either use something like an Intel NUC. Maybe you can convince Ryan Lorraine to send you a free NUC. I haven't, and or you can use a maybe Raspberry Pi version 4, which are quite powerful and quite cheap, in my opinion. Optional, you can also use an USB network card. And why do you need that? Well, we may want to do both tap and access into the mini PC. So this way, of course, you can connect the mini PC to your internal network, but then it will not be out of band anymore. Me personally, I have, let's say, very good experience using both Edimax and Anchor adapters, which are like $10, $15. So the whole setup, um, I would say, costs between $150 and maybe $400. So this is what we have. The internet goes in through the hub. The hub replicates one port into your Wi-Fi router, another port goes into your mini PC, and then again, you can, if you want, you'll reduce the security a bit by doing it so, but it's maybe more convenient. Again, it will not be out of band anymore, but you can connect an USB Ethernet adapter to the mini PC back into the router, and then you can just log in there to see what's going on. Now, for the mini PC, I run Linux and Suricata version 3 Plus because we want the DNS log from Suricata. You want to enable DNS log, HTTP log, and the fast log with extended formats. You want to enable TLS log, and I personally disable stat log, which just fills the disk. For NetFlow, you can use PMACCTD. And if you're really paranoid and have a lot of disk space, I guess you can also just TCP dump pretty much everything. So one idea could be, for instance, not port 443, because dumping port 443 might not be very productive or useful. One of the issues here is that, for instance, streaming platforms like Netflix or I don't know HBO Go, they use port 80 for that. So if you're gonna watch, let's say, some 4K movies, you will fill your hard drive very quickly. What do the logs look like? These are the kind of logs that Suricata produces. What you see here is a DNS log. You see a couple of queries. You see a couple of responses. I personally, I process these DNS logs into a much, let's say, easier to work with format, in which we have a timestamp, we have the host, and we have the respective IP resolution for that. And this I process in many different ways and you can obviously do the same. For instance, maybe one of the easiest things to do um, is shown here by this bash script. You can just take the logs. You can extract the DNS queries from the last couple of days or the last day, and then you can just make a top of the DNS queries and email them to you, just to get an idea of how many queries are happening per day from your home. And there's, of course, many other ideas. There's also, let's say, an improvement. The first improvement to this method would be to have the network tap and then to have some IOCs that you can also check on the network traffic. And for instance, you can take a bunch of IOCs and can try to match them against the network traffic. My recommendation would be to match them both on the actual traffic and going back a couple of months, just in case, because sometimes you get IOCs and those IOCs are related to something which happened in the past. And together, this can also prove quite useful. Now, there's even more improvements that you can do. Some of the things that I am doing myself in terms of heuristics, for instance, would be a TLS certificates, TLS connections, SSL certificates analysis. For instance, looking for connections associated with hosts which have self-signed certificates. And this can be a very good giveaway of traffic that shouldn't be there. DNS queries frequency is another thing you can do. For instance, look for some kind of a pattern. You can apply Fourier transforms and find the DNS queries which happen regularly, such as maybe every hour or maybe every 6 hours, well, and so on and so on. Another thing to search for would be unusual domains, things like .pw or .cf or .tk, and there's a lot of these free domains out there, pretty much similar to dynamic DNS providers, which are also quite interesting to spot in the traffic. So all this are likely to boost your detection capabilities. And then other ideas could be, for instance, net flow analysis, extracting the top traffic IPs, doing a whois lookup on them, and just flagging them for inspection. I do this regularly, and I filter out things like the Netflix IPs, like all the other streaming IPs. And what is left, obviously, whenever you see a spike in there, that requires some additional inspection. Now, all of this, I know it sounds quite nice, but yeah, what can you find with this? And you guys are gonna say, um, you know, show us the money, show us what you found with it. So yeah, let me show you what I call case number one that was spotted by this technology. I was like one day, you see that actually it was quite a long time ago, 2014. I was looking at my DNS logs and I spotted a suspicious looking host name, sechex.info or sesex.info. And if you look at the timestamps, you will probably notice that this is kind of happening regularly, almost like every hour. So what we have here, like 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and so on. So this is pretty much what I was talking about. This is the case of something which is being queried once per hour, like regularly, with maybe some jitter correction. So it's not always on the same minute. So I started looking into this just to understand. The first thing, if I looked into the whois record of these hosts, and I noticed there are some Gmail, like pretty generic Gmail addresses associated with this, 310 Crescent at Gmail, Robert Statica at Gmail. Couldn't find, let's say, anything interesting on it. So I did a bit more digging. I tried to connect there on HTTPS. There's a blank page, nothing to see. Doing a bit more digging. If you look into the certificate is also pretty generic. There's no organization in there. Well, it's issued by GoDaddy. It was valid for 1 year. So at this point, you can imagine that I became quite suspicious, and let's say I was quite confident that I caught something that shouldn't be in there. This shouldn't be my network traffic. Also, by just Googling for setchecks.info, you back then you wouldn't find much. So there was like pretty much nothing in there. So I decided just to block it because I control my own DNS server. Maybe we can talk about this another time, how to set up your own blocking DNS using Pi-hole and various blocking lists. But I just blocked it for my home network. And then, you know, I kind of suspiciously discovered that also the amount of queries that I was getting, they were more or less matching what appeared to be some kind of a pattern. So if you look into this graphic, which is by hours, you notice that the amount of connections is lower between maybe 12 and 6, 7 p.m. And to be honest, I was wondering why that is the case. So keep looking. I is actually making these queries. Funny thing is that when I started counting the amount of devices in my home network, I've reached a funny number of about 34 different devices connected to the internet. So that includes like a bunch of smart TVs, tablets, mobile phones, uh, network attached storages, smartwatches, and so on and so on. 34 different devices were connected. But well, what was going on here, obviously, the amount of queries was smaller between 1 and 6. And actually, that was the time when I was mostly in the office. And I realized that this is likely something that I'm taking with me to the office. So, doing a bit more digging, I was able to find what it was. This was actually an app called Wicker that I was using back then. Um, which stopped working actually after I blocked segex or sesex.info in my DNS server. Uh, kind of mystery solved, I would say. It still gave me a bit of a panic as it wasn't, I would say, very obvious. It wasn't like communication to wicker.com or even wicker.info. It was just this shady sesex.info domain with no whois or registration information about it. Yeah. Um, well, case number 2. So again, all this, to be honest, I found them not by scripting, but I found them by just looking at the logs. If you remember what Rob Joyce was saying, someone paying attention to the logs can sometimes be quite powerful. So as I was looking through the HTTP logs this time, I noticed that again, exactly every hour, you said like 3:38, 4:38, 5:38, 6:39. So there's like a very small delay and so on and so on. Every hour, there's an HTTP connection to an IP address. There's no host name here, so there was nothing in the DNS logs. And the path is something CGI being client CGI and some serial or indicator, and the user agent was wget. So again, something very shady happening every hour. Um, well, this I would say was also very, very suspicious. So I started digging. The connections were all to port 8000. So I probed the host a bit just to see what's in there. Um, it was basically in South Korea, the generic KRNYC network. So not much you can discover from this, like who is actually behind this IP address and the traffic happening in your home. And spoiling, let's say, into the traffic, well, I was able to find the reason for that. And well, it was a network attached storage, an extremer network attached storage that I purchased a couple of years ago. And I'm no longer using it, just in case you're wondering. What is interesting about this network attached storage is that this function, this beaming to one of their command and control servers actually had a buffer overflow in it. So with my colleague Vitaly Kamlyuk, we reversed engineered the binary that was doing this traffic on the NAS was running from cron hourly. And they were actually reading data from a network socket onto a buffer located on the stack that had a fixed size of about 200 bytes. So like super easy to exploit for somebody who wanted, if they wanted, and they had access to the network traffic. Not to mention that this could have been exploited very easily uh, by the obviously by the owners of this server. And I know there's a question from Dave in the chat. Hey Dave, hope you're doing fine. Thanks for joining this uh, op, opcode call. Um, how many implants actually add jitter to bypass statistical analysis of this type? Like every hour plus minus rand of 30. Actually, I'd be surprised that there are quite a few. Um, Especially there's quite a few of them when we speak about high-end APTs. So all high-end APTs actually do that. They do add this jitter. And we've seen quite funny cases when, let's say, the developers from a certain APT, they prefer, let's say, a very specific type of jitter, and by just looking for that jitter code alone, you can find more of their implants. So on one hand, obviously, this can bypass or fool statistical analysis. On the other hand, it can be helpful to catch the implants themselves. Um, yeah, so next time, I think, again, as I said, if Matt wants to have me again, we can talk a bit about increasing the cost, complicating targeting and exploitation, which I guess are the next steps. Pretty much, I guess, getting more visibility is the pretty much the most basic step that you can take when you want to, let's say, to do a bit better. Just if you care about OPSEC, if you care about yourself getting attacked, the most basic step is
Just
to
for the record, you're
put a
welcome
network
to come
tap
back
on your
anytime.
home internet. And in reality, you don't know what's flowing through your home internet link unless you tap it. So I've been tapping my home internet now for about 6 years, I guess. And I can tell you that it can be done very easily with a relatively simple hardware configuration. A lot of people are scared about doing this in the sense, oh, we need to install Linux and we need to buy a hub. And well, I can tell you that it can be done. I've been trying to convince Ryan Narain for many years to do this for his home. Still trying to convince him. Maybe one of these days we'll be able to do it. But I can guarantee that this offers a huge level of defense and awareness. Whenever there's some new report out there, whenever Kaspersky, Symantec, Trend Micro, whoever he said, you name it, they published a new report about some significant threat, you can just take those indicators and then you search them back against your DNS logs, HTTP logs, NetFlow, and you can very easily say if you have ever been affected by that threat or not. So far, I was not able to find any APT attacks on my network. That doesn't mean, of course, that I've never been attacked. I do operate on the principle that my computer is owned by at least 3 APTs. So I try to combine, let's say, having different computers, having decoys, sometimes putting information there on the machine, uh, designed to deceive an attacker which has access, or just to, uh, well, trigger a number of alarms and alerts. And one last thing that I would like to mention is that when you elevate the cost of SIGINT, remember that you will become a target for HUMINT. And that's pretty much all I have for today. Happy hunting, and I hope you guys stay safe. both in the cyber realm and against the invisible enemy.
Thanks, Costin. I just realized after I was on mute on Zoom, but you're more than welcome to come back anytime. And apparently, I mean, we'll confirm after, but it sounds like Ryan wants to host and moderate the next fireside chat, and you will be speaking with Dev if he's accepting. So that should be quite interesting. we all know that Ryan is a great moderator, so that should be quite cool. Yeah, I don't know if the chat has any more question. At some point, Dragos made a comment. He said you should use dual-com ETAP 2003 and 2 non-Realtek USB 3 Ethernet adapters. So I don't know if you can say more about that in the chat, but yeah, that sounded interesting. Although I don't know any of those devices, so I will not be able to comment on that.
Well, yeah, a Shark Tap is also a good choice. I guess that the old-fashioned hardware hub, so the hub that just does the electronic port mirroring, is probably the safest solution. Indeed, using smart switches can be tricky, especially some of them get an IP address by the HCP. So there's absolutely like quite a few tricky issues there. But the old-fashioned hardware hub is the way to go for me.
So yeah, question from the chat. So you never found any APT?
In my home, again, I'm tapping my home. So in my home, I never found any APT. Obviously, we found quite a few APTs in other places, but at least in my home, I haven't found any. So far. This doesn't mean, again, that I haven't been hit. It just means that I need to work better at catching some.
Yeah, I mean, like that's my following question with that is since everyone is working from home now, like have you seen any like changes and in terms of like the behavior of attackers? Because it does make sense now for attackers to actually target like people's home, since well, everyone is working from home, right? Home is the office. Like when the bring your own device was a big like polemic, no, it's even worse. It's like literally like working from home.
Well, I guess that the overall amount of attacks, they're kind of now increasing. So in particular, when you look at attacks related to things like COVID keywords, then the number has been increasing a lot since the beginning of March. Yeah, that's probably when the spike began. Another thing was that we were kind of thinking that probably a Zoom a Zoom remote 0-day would now be priceless for a lot of attackers.
Yeah.
Imagine what can be accomplished with that. So I'm also looking forward to the next talk, speaking about Zoom security.
The next update from Zerodium on their table.
Yeah, I wonder if Zerodium will push an update or notification in regards to Zoom 0 days. That would be interesting to see.
I can always try to invite Shauki for the next roundtable between you and David. Maybe he would accept.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, I doubt so, but that would be funny. Another question from the chat. One from Dave. If your house is in Moscow. Another one is a quick and dirty config to run 3 catalogs through the free CTI.
So the first one, home is in Moscow. No, actually, I'm based in Bucharest. I'm Romanian, and I've been living in Bucharest all my life. I've been to Moscow quite a few times, to be honest. It's beautiful. There are a lot of beautiful things to visit if you're into arts. Nevertheless, my home is in Bucharest. And let me see, what was the other question about?
Is there quick and dirty config to run 3 catalogs through free CTI?
Is there a quick and dirty config to run Suricata through FreeCTI? I can't say, to be honest, because I just built all my parsers myself, all the Suricata parsing and heuristics. I built them myself, so I can't say if there's a quick and dirty way for that.
Mm. And well, the follow-up question for that was like, does that make sense to do? It would just be too noisy.
I can't say again, but I would say that the way to go forward is just a lot of experimenting. So I didn't know what kind of heuristics to build when I started doing this. It was all, by experimenting, looking at the logs with the naked eye, and then trying to build heuristics based on the observations and what looked suspicious in the logs.
Another question from Yan. What's your opinion on using the following tools? Suricata for the IDS and some IOCs, and Zik for network security monitoring, and Rita for threat hunting in a home environment. What would be the hardware specs? Can you do that with an Intel NUC, I guess?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like to be honest, the most recent generation of Intel NUCs is quite powerful. So you can get one with an i7 CPU. Well, obviously you'll have to invest. I guess the investment would be something in the range of $1,000 for the i7 NUC and memory plus an SSD. But again, I think it's a very worth investment. It will absolutely work. I can tell you that. This also depends a lot on the network speed. So do you have a gigabit network connection? Do you have a 100 megabits? If you have a 100 megabits, you can do these things even with a cheaper hardware, such as maybe like a generic $100 or $200 mini PC you can get on Amazon will handle 100 megabit traffic without problems. But if you want to do real-time gigabit pattern matching with Suricata, then you'll need the high-end Intel NUC.
Maybe we can get Intel to give away some NUC for the next edition. That would be a nice thing, so we can build some home lab to start tapping our homes.
I'm absolutely for it.
And yeah. Anything you want to add, Costin? Just checking there is more question. Like, I don't see any more questions so far.
Yeah. Jeremy says about endpoint monitoring OS query. Oh yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Of course, you want to collect logs from all the endpoints that you have in the home. What I'm doing, I'm collecting both sys logs on the Unix and macOS machines, and then I'm collecting sysmon logs from the Windows machines. It's very good just to collect, store them somewhere. If at some point you get compromised, then you have information that you can sift through in order to find when it happened, how it happened, what triggered the attack, all these key elements which can help you figure out exactly what's going on and how you got compromised.
I think we have another question also. I have another non-relevant question for Costin from Dave. Does he see a particular movement towards different protocols for C2, aka is DNS tunneling common or only HTTPS? Or ...
Well, first of all, I want to say that Dave is asking all the right questions. So obviously he knows what he's talking about when asking these particular questions.
I'm
They're
not
not
sure
just
if
the
like
right
the ...
question.
is like the actual question or if it's before.
Got it. But yeah, we're seeing some, let's say, interesting protocols such as DNS tunneling. Yeah, there's a number of APT groups like, for instance, Oil Rig or Muddy Water who like DNS tunneling nowadays. The plain old HTTPS is probably still a favorite. Passive backdoors are also kind of, let's say, interesting. So when we speak about the truly high-end threat actors out there, they all kind of stand up for some, let's say, particular features. So one of them can be passive backdoors. So, for instance, passive backdoors that react to ICMP traffic or UDP traffic or even HTTP traffic. So imagine dropping such a passive backdoor onto a web server and then doing all the CNS communication with the backdoor through HTTP requests into that machine. But I would say that pretty much all the high-end actors are have all sorts of tools in their toolboxes that use additional protocols, even if HTTPS is probably still the most popular choice. Even HTTP is still a popular choice, but yeah, we do see UDP-based communications. I'll give you another example. Recently, we did a red teaming pen testing exercise, and we decided to use WireGuard, which is a quite interesting modern VPN, but it can also be used in a very sneaky way together with a Raspberry Pi, just to drop something into a network. With the WireGuard VPN, it can be quite tricky to spot if you don't know what to look for.
Yeah, another follow-up question. What's the weirdest protocol use you have seen so far?
What's the weirdest protocol? Well, I would say there's maybe not necessarily the weirdest, but what's, in my opinion, the hardest to catch is Tor-based command and control. So there's a couple of backdoors out there which use a Tor-based CNC mechanism. So in that case, you just need to have a method of spotting Tor traffic from your home. And if you use Tor yourself, so if Tor is, let's say, legitimate traffic, then it can be extremely difficult to identify a backdoor communicating by Tor in your network. But yeah, there's a lot of exotic things out there. There's probably many stories and there's many things we can talk about here. I don't know if you have time, so maybe this is a good question to answer the next time we speak about OPSEC and increasing the cost of exploitation.
Well, that's a good question for Ariane to mark down for the next fire chat, for in 2 weeks. Since apparently Dev says like 2 weeks is not enough to prepare like slides for a keynote. Another question: what suricata beaconing detection techniques are on your top list, except time patterns and protocol abuse?
Yeah, like I said, analysis of the SSL certificates can be quite productive in spotting connections to, let's say, unusual places. Obviously, I don't want to give away all my tricks because I'm pretty sure the APTs are listening. So
the APTs are in the chat.
Tomorrow they will just simply adjust all their techniques in order to avoid the things that I'm talking about. So obviously this is something which I already assumed when I put together this talk. So yeah, without talking about everything, I would say the SSL certificate analysis, looking for traffic anomalies, pretty much all sorts of protocol anomalies that you can search for, and unusual protocols such as ICMP, UDP, they are in my, let's say, top 3, top 5.
Cool. Thanks again for joining us, Costin. It was a real pleasure to have you, and really interesting talk. And
thank you, Matt.
I hope Ryan is gonna manage to convince both you and Dave for the fireside chat for the third edition of that virtual conference. That should be fun. And thanks again, Costin.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you. Bye bye.
Cheers.
Take
Bye.
care, everyone.
Yeah, good call, good call. I forgot to unmute myself. Welcome back, and we're gonna get ready for last presentation from Patrick. And that presentation is gonna be about Patrick's latest findings on his Zoom vulnerabilities. And like Costing was saying, very likely Zoom and probably other platforms probably gonna appear on those lists for like expensive exploits for remote code execution. Yeah, no. There is a 30 seconds delay by the way. But yeah, so again, just a quick reminder. If you're discussing about the conference on Twitter, don't forget to use the OPCDE 2020 hashtag. You're more than welcome to join us on ARC. The slides will be published after, and then also the videos also will be on YouTube, obviously. And well, lip reading. Good luck doing some lip reading on a French person, you know. But yeah, well, that's pretty much it. And yeah, let me just do that quick transition, and we can have our last speaker, Patrick.
Social distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to OpCode Virtual Summit.
Hi, Patrick. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Okay.
Matt. How's it?
Perfect.
Aloha.
Hello. So yeah, so thanks again for joining us for your presentation. And yeah, like you're live now, so you can go ahead.
Great. First, want to thank Matt for organizing this conference, making it freely available and available online. It's really, really cool. Also, thanks for the invite to talk about some of the Zoom vulnerabilities and issues that I discovered. So what we're going to talk about today are some flaws in the macOS client. I published a blog post that has a lot of technical details, good diagrams and overviews. So we're going to kind of walk through that first. And as that will allow me to explain exactly how I found the bugs and how to weaponize and exploit them. We're then going to switch and do a few demos to kind of illustrate the impact of the bugs and also how a attacker or piece of malware would go about exploiting these vulnerabilities. So I want to start by noting these bugs were in the, at the time, latest version of the macOS client. Both bugs were local bugs. Also, I think that's important to note because this would mean that an adversary or a piece of malware would need initial code execution on an infected system. But we'll see, though, that these bugs then give such an attacker or piece of malware the ability to either escalate their privileges to root or surreptitiously access the mic and the webcam by piggybacking off Zoom's access. I also want to note that Zoom has released a patch for both of these bugs. They actually patched them within a day, so kudos to Zoom. So if you're using Zoom and are concerned about the security of the product, definitely download and run the latest version because there's lots of good security goodness and patches in that latest version. So start with a bit of background talking about Zoom, and I think also this will shed light on kind of the platform as the whole, as the whole, and also kind of why I got inspired to look at the platform. So as I'm sure we're all aware, Zoom has become incredibly popular over the last few weeks due to the unfortunate pandemic that's impacting people all over the world. It's very common now for people to use Zoom, both for personal reasons, for example, to talk to their friends and relatives, but businesses we're seeing also are now leveraging Zoom. There was a recent article a few weeks ago showing that the UK government was actually using Zoom for government communications. So, obviously a very, very interesting target. And we take a step back and look at Zoom's track record. We can see that its privacy and security track record really wasn't that stellar. So let's briefly talk about some of the previous bugs before we dive into the ones that I discovered. So first, last summer, we had an issue where a researcher named Johnson found a really nice remote vulnerability in Zoom. In short, a malicious website could coerce a user's system to turn on the webcam. So this obviously both a security and privacy concern. You don't want remote websites being able to turn on the webcam. And the flaw was because Zoom had installed. So the user had Zoom installed and somehow visited a malicious website. The website could turn on the user's camera and spy on them, obviously. Less than ideal. Interesting fact about this vulnerability is that Apple actually pushed out an update via their malware removal tool, MRT, as a way to actually remove this vulnerable Zoom component from systems around the world. So interesting to see Apple both taking this action without user consent and also using their malware removal tool to do that. So it was good probably from a security point of view because it uninstalled this insecure Zoom component that could be left running even if the user uninstalled Zoom. But again, I think it's some insight into Apple's capability and power and shows that at any time they can remove any program from your computer without your consent. Moving on, most recently we had an issue in the iOS application where application Zoom specifically would send Facebook data to Facebook even if you didn't have a Facebook account. From really not a lot of security implications here, but more of a privacy issue. Zoom, as we note, was quick to patch this and basically said, hey, sorry, we're using this third-party SDK, this framework. We weren't aware that it was basically tracking and sending this information. So kudos to them for fixing this, but a little worrisome that they're compiling third-party frameworks into their code and not auditing and looking what these frameworks are doing. So these issues, these bugs, I think were kind of illustrative of the approach that Zoom had towards security and privacy, which was very lax, right? It really wasn't a priority. So I decided to kind of dig in and look at the Mac client, especially after one of my friends, Felix, another fellow security researcher, noticed that the installer did some less than, I would say, up and up action. So for example, it kind of uses some tricks on Mac OS to install itself with you actually not having to hit the install button. So I dove in and started looking at the Zoom installer. It's distributed as a PKG file. We'll show this in the demo, but you can use a utility such as Suspicious Package. It's a free online application that allows you to look at the contents of PKG files without having to extract all the files or run the PKG file. So if we open this package, zoom.pkg, in the Suspicious Package analysis application, we can see there's a variety of scripts that will get run when the user kicks off the installer. The pre-install script, this is a default script that any PKG can add, and it will have commands that will be executed pre-install. That's why it's called pre-install. So we can see Zoom does a variety of things. And basically, if we scroll down, or actually, I can show you this now. I think it's around, and this is a little hard to see, so I'll cut and paste this into a window. Just click on the text edit window. Run with root. We can see that this application is going to execute something called Zoom authentication tool run with root. And this is in order to install the application because perhaps the user doesn't have the access or the ability to write things directly to the application directly. So what Zoom is basically saying is, hey, we need to elevate our privileges so that we can complete the install. This is fairly common, right? The majority of installers oftentimes need to elevate their privileges to perform certain privilege actions. But I've looked at a lot of installers, and over the past few years have found it's difficult to do this in a secure manner. So once Felix kind of noted that Zoom's installer was, kind of questionable, maybe not written as well as it could, I wanted to dive in and see if I could uncover any flaws. So what we can do is we can look at this Zoom authentication tool, because this is what gets executed to run with root. We don't know what that run with root is yet, but we'll see in a minute. It's a script that gets run with root. We can hop over into a disassembler. And I apologize, this might be a little hard to see. Unfortunately, Hopper doesn't allow me to make this bigger. But again, I'll copy and paste this into the text edit window. Make this a little smaller. And basically, there's a method called execute command. This is what that utility is going to execute. When we scroll down, really none of this matters except for the call to authorize execute with privileges. This is a well-known Apple API that an installer or an application can call in order to perform a authorized action. If you're familiar with the authentication prompt on your system, when you run an installer, it's possible that this API is responsible for that. So if we hop back to the blog, talk a little bit about this API, because it's unfortunately everywhere, and we'll see that it's a deprecated API, which can lead to problematic scenarios. So here's kind of a diagrammatic overview of the API. We can see, for example, it describes the problem, and the problem is basically, in a nutshell, that it performs no validation on what it's about to execute. So a legitimate application can call this API and say, hey, please execute this script or this command for me with elevated privileges because I need to complete an install. The authentication will take care of the pop-up and handling everything. And behind the scenes, we can see what it's going to do. It's going to basically call into this binary called security auth trampoline. This is a set UID binary that ships with macOS. And then once this application or this binary has successfully authenticated, meaning shown the pop-up and the user has put in their correct or an admin credentials, it will execute whatever the API was called with as root. But again, there's no verification. This is problematic because it means if a local adversary or piece of malware is on the system, if what is about to be executed is not adequately protected, meaning it's not owned by root, so it can be edited perhaps by that local unprivileged adversary or piece of malware, this API will naively and blindly execute it with root privileges. So obviously an attacker can subvert what is about to be executed, potentially, and then gain privileges as soon as that is executed with root privileges. So we see Zoom is using this API. So the question is zooming this securely? So if we run the Zoom package, we can see the authentication pop-up. This is fairly standard. And if the user puts in their credentials, it's going to execute something behind the scenes. So we need to figure out what it's executing, and if whatever it's executing, a local unprivileged attacker can modify in the background to then add code or command to get that executed as root, kind of during the install process. So the easiest way we can do this, and we'll do this in the demo as well, we run a process monitor and we look for the execution of the security auth trampoline process. Recall, this is the actual Apple system binary that handles the authentication requests and ultimately executes with root privileges, because it's owned by root, set UID, whatever the installer or application has specified. So in our process monitor, we can see that the command that's passed to it is run with root. And this is not surprising, right? This is what we saw in the Zoom installer package. This is what it was executing. So this all lines up. So then the question then becomes, what is this run with root command, script, binary, and can we modify it? So if we go back or look closer at the install process, we can see that when the PKG is run, this run with root file is copied to a installer directory by the installer. And good news for us as a hacker or unauthorized piece of malware, this install directory is owned with with user permissions. So this means that the run with root bash script that is dropped by the installer and that will be run with root is not protected. It is editable by anybody as anybody on the system, even a user without any special permissions. So what we can basically do, and here's a diagrammatic overview, is we can basically watch and wait for the Zoom installer or updater to be run. We can then detect when that run with root file has been created. And since it's created with just normal writable permissions by anyone, right, just sitting in a temp directory, anyone can hop in and modify it. We can go in and then surreptitiously add some code or some commands. And then when that gets executed during the install process, whatever we've added to that command, sorry, to that script will be executed. Because again, the authenticate execute with privileges API does not validate when it's executed. So that's kind of the issue. That's kind of the flaw. So I'm going to are on our sides. Let's see if we have this. Okay. See how the resolution is on this VM. Give me 1 sec. Okay, gonna log in. My super secret password for the VM. Make this a little bigger. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run a process monitor. And this is going to allow us to see and confirm what Zoom is running. So make this a touch bigger. Okay, so the process monitor is running. We're now going to run the Zoom installer. Really tiny, I apologize. Basically though, we're gonna click continue. Eventually there's going to be an authentication prompt right here. This is Zoom asking for credentials, saying, hey, I need to your credentials in order to complete the install. So we can go ahead here and authenticate, and then Zoom is happily installed. If we kill the process monitor and we look for this trampoline process, just a little bigger here. We can see that, as we talked about, and I showed in the blog, this security off trampoline process was exec to execute the run with root command. So this is just confirming, yes, in the background, Zoom is invoking this insecure API and executing this run with root. We hop over to the install directory, com.apple.install this, do an ls-lart. We can see that there is that run with root script that was dropped by the installer. And more importantly, the permissions on this file are test/system. And that's who I am running as, just the default user. This is actually a standard user with no admin privileges. So again, this confirms that Zoom is going to execute this file with root privileges. We can actually confirm that if we hop back to the process monitor. We can see that binsh bash is running with UUID 0, it's running as root, and it's executing the run with root. So security auth trampoline executes that. So what we're going to now do is we're going to show how we can exploit that. We're going to add some commands to that run with root, and then during the install process, we will hopefully pop a root shell. So let me just go ahead and delete this install directory. And let's kill Zoom. Okay, we don't need this process monitor. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pop a root shell out of temp. So I just want to show you that ls, there's nothing in the temp directory, standard stuff. We'll show there's a file that gets dropped here. So what we're gonna do is run the Zoom installer again. We're gonna do this manually. Obviously we could do this programmatically. We're gonna go through, hit continue. It's gonna start doing its thing. Ask for its authentication credentials. What we're going to do now is we're going to take some commands to pop a root shell. We're going to cd into the installer directory. We're going to see that the run with root command is there. We're running as a normal user, no privs, but we can edit this file. So we're going to use vim. And you can see I am basically just copying a shell to the temp directory, setting it to be owned by root, setting the set UID bid, and then executing it. So we're going to save this. Some impressive Vim skills. It's really all I know how to do. Come back. We're going to authenticate. Zoom's going to install, and it's going to execute that script that we've added those malicious commands to, and Zoom, go away. Demo gods are stoked. You can see, who am I? We now have a root shell. If we look at the temp directory, we can see KSH is there, LART, KSH, and we can see that it's owned by root, and it has the set UID. So now we have a root shell that we can pop. Again, the attack scenario would be an unprivileged attacker or a local piece of malware that's perhaps running without root privileges. What it's going to do is going to wait until Zoom is run or the installer is executed, and then can elevate its privileges to root using this attack. So that's kind of the first issue, kind of neat logic flaw in the Zoom installer that allows malicious code to elevate its privileges to root. Now, the next local flaw that affects macOS, let me just have some water. Boils down to the fact that Zoom was compiled with an interesting, let's say, exception that would allow malicious code to be injected into its trusted processing space. And this was problematic because Zoom is likely going to have access to the mic and the webcam. So in recent versions of macOS, imagine malware gets onto your system, and perhaps it wants to spy on you, turn on the mic, turn on the webcam, you know, capture room audio, you know, see you walking around in your awesome Objective by the Sea t-shirt, and so it tries to access the mic or the webcam. Apple has added a great security feature on Catalina, and maybe even macOS version before, that basically shows, will block that access until the user has explicitly approved this. And this was done to protect against this exact kind of attack. So for example, when the user runs Zoom, this is legit Zoom, nothing suspicious at this point. When Zoom goes to access the mic and the webcam, macOS is going to block that, and then the user is going to have to approve it. Now, the majority of users that use Zoom are going to either give it access to the mic or the webcam. Otherwise, Zoom is essentially useless. So what I thought is, can I find a way to piggyback off Zoom's ability in order to access the mic and the camera via Zoom's permissions? And as we'll see, the answer was yes. So popping down here, the first thing we can do is we can check that Zoom is validly signed and it's compiled with something called the hardened runtime. So initially, this appears problematic for us as hackers because the hardened runtime basically says don't allow code to be injected into whatever application is compiled with that. This is something I talked about back at Zero Nights in 2016. At the time, Apple was not using hardened runtime, and so I said, hey, this would be a good idea. You know, something they were already doing on iOS. They should port this to macOS. Not sure they were there and listening, but regardless, recent versions of macOS, you can compile applications with this hardened runtime. And you can determine that via the code sign utility. Specifically, you want to look for this right here, flags equal OX 10,000. This is basically saying this application was compiled with the hardened runtime, meaning local code malware attackers, in theory, should not be able to inject malicious code into this application. So it's a self-defense mechanism that applications can opt into at compile. So looks like Zoom did this. So far, so good. However, Zoom's security and privacy record has left a lot to be desired. So I said, I'm going to just keep looking a little more because they've made a lot of missteps. And so maybe there's one. So the next thing I did is I dumped Zoom's entitlements. Now, if you're not familiar with entitlements on macOS, it's a way to convey additional information to the operating system about what capabilities you want. So here, for example, we can see that Zoom has the entitlement to access the camera and the mic. And these are needed. macOS will still pop up and request the user, but you have to have these entitlements in order to even attempt to access the mic and the webcam. So this makes sense, right? Again, entitlements, abilities that you want to convey to macOS. However, I scrolled down a little further and I saw this very interesting entitlement, com.apple security CS disable library validation. Apple documents this, and it says it's a Boolean value that indicates whether the application may load arbitrary plugins or frameworks without code signing. Now, again, I'm always thinking things from kind of this offensive point of view, and I said, okay, well, if Zoom has this exception to allow unsigned dynamic libraries, perhaps I can get Zoom to load my own unsigned dynamic library, which normally should not be allowed because of the hardened runtime, but because they have this exception, it might be possible. And then once my dynamic library is running in the process context of Zoom, in theory, I should inherit all of Zoom's permission, including access to the mic and the webcam. So that was kind of the idea, and we'll walk through exactly how we achieve that. So we first need to figure out a way to get code executing in Zoom's context process. To add an additional dynamic library, because macOS will validate the code signature, and if that is changed, it won't, for example, continue to give it access to the mic or the webcam. This is obviously smart. Otherwise, you could just generically subvert any application that the user had given access to the mic or the webcam. However, I thought I might be able to use an interesting dilib injection technique that's called dilib proxying. And I have a diagram right here. The idea is you simply replace a legitimate dynamic library that the application has a dependency on with your own, and then your own malicious library, you proxy any commands, for example, to functions or symbols, to the original dilib. And I have another diagram here, sorry for the scroll. But when everything is said and done, this is the idea. So we'll replace a legitimate dynamic library with our own. We'll add some compiler directives to redirect any requests for objects and functions to the original dilib that we've renamed, and then everything will seamlessly work with no problems because the executable will naively load this. So what we can do is we first need to find a dynamic library that Zoom depends on that we can rename. Now, this is important because if it was only linked against system libraries, we can't modify those because those are protected with SIP. Can't even rename them. Luckily, though, we can see that Zoom exists, or rather depends on this curl64 framework. And we can determine that by running the otool command with the -l flag, which shows you all the dynamic libraries an application is dependent on. So, wondering where's this curl64? Because what it is, it's prepended with this @r path. So to figure out what this @r path is, it basically stands for runtime path. We can again run otool with the lowercase l, looking again at the Zoom application, and we find this load command, this lcr path, and this describes what the r path, the runtime path, will be. And we can see it's going to be the executable path // frameworks. So at runtime, this will get resolved to be the applications zoom.app contents macOS // frameworks, which means it'll be in the application bundle content / frameworks. And we can confirm that if we look at Zoom's application bundle, we can see, yes, indeed, there is this framework and all these that Zoom will link. And we can actually do that here. I'll just show you again. If we come to applications, do show package contents, we see, yes, there's the framework directory, and there's that curl framework. Awesome. So this means we have a directory with dynamic libraries and frameworks that Zoom is going to run that we can modify, right? It's not SIP protected, it's not owned by root, et cetera, et cetera. So what we can do is now we can drop a dynamic library in there, proxy one of the legitimate ones there, and hopefully it will get loaded. I gave a talk about this, so if you want to read more about the run paths and executable paths, check out the blog. So I targeted the libSSL dilib. It's a standalone binary, just easier to modify than a full framework or a bundle. And as I mentioned, the first thing is we need to rename this dilib so that we can plant our own to get that loaded. So what we do is we simply rename it _libSSL 1.0. We could rename it anything. I just chose that. And then if we go and re-execute Zoom, we can see that the application immediately crashes. And this is actually a good thing because this shows it's trying to load the libSSL dynamic library and it can't find it anymore. And this is shown in the image where it says the reason for crash is image not found. And it references the libSSL library that we've just renamed. So in theory, if we put our own dynamic library there and call it libSSL 1.1.0, Zoom should run that. So we pop into Xcode, we create a simple dilib, unsigned, we add a constructor, we save it to the framework directory as libSSL, and then we rerun Zoom. The good thing is our Zoom dilib will now get loaded, but unfortunately the application will immediately exit shortly thereafter. This is unsurprising because we've basically just taken a legitimate SSL library that likely had a bunch of required SSL capabilities, functions, methods, et cetera, and just replaced it with a vanilla, bare, skeleton-based dilib. So Zoom, tries to call into it. There's no functions found, and so it gracefully handles that and exits. So now we need to go ahead and we need to implement the proxying. So anytime Zoom requests or needs SSL capabilities and calls into what is now our library, we proxy it and forward that on to the original library so that legitimate functionality is maintained, so we don't break anything. So it turns out this is pretty easy to do. It's a very kind of neat trick. You can do it all with linker directives, so you don't have to rewrite any forwarding code. You basically specify a -x linker flag, and then a -re-export library flag, and then the path to the library that you have reproxied. Now there's one more trick, there's one more thing you have to do. This creates a dilib that's almost ready for proxying, but unfortunately some paths and names are going to be wrong. So you then execute the install name tool, and we'll show this in the demo in a second. And we basically change the path so that it points to the original dynamic library that we've renamed. Because again, our goal is so that when the Zoom executable calls into the SSL library, it gets the original SSL library's functionality, right? We're just using the SSL to get ourselves loaded. We don't want to actually implement any SSL functionality. So once we run the install name tool command, we can look at our malicious library. This libSSL is not the original one, it's our malicious dynamic library. We can see that the loader, the linker, the compiler has created this lc re-export dilib load command. And this is what tells the runtime, hey, if you have a request for the libSSL library, I don't know how to answer it, but I know who does, so please follow that. And this is the path to the dynamic library, the original one that contains the actual SSL functionality. So that's all you have to do. And once you compile and plant that dynamic library, we rerun Zoom and we can see, yes, indeed, Zoom has loaded our dynamic library into its process space. And since we are now running within the process context of Zoom, assuming Zoom has been given access to the mic and the webcam, this malicious code can directly access the mic and webcam as well. macOS will see that request. However, it sees that it's coming from Zoom. Zoom's digital signature, its binary on disk, has not been tampered with. And so the request is allowed. So first and foremost, this means we can inject into legitimate Zoom meetings and record both the room capture audio and the webcam. There won't be any alerts. Better yet, what we can do is we can actually execute Zoom in the background invisibly at arbitrary times and leverage its access to turn on the mic or the camera whenever we want. So we don't actually have to wait until Zoom is running via the user to do this. We can execute this in the background. So the attack scenario would be malware gets on a system that wants to spy on the user via the mic and the webcam. You can imagine UK government is using Zoom. Zoom's running on their systems. Malware, once it gains access, can just run Zoom in the background and then turn on the mic and listen to whatever is being said in the UK government, hear them all complaining about what a stupid idea Brexit is, and can capture that without any indications, right? No pop-ups from macOS. So that's kind of an interesting attack scenario that I could see attackers or malware perhaps leveraging in the future. So to test this in my malicious dynamic library, when I named libSSL, I added some code to just capture some audio and mic off the webcam, just 5 seconds of doing that. Standard mic webcam access. Compiled this in. If I ran this as a standalone, macOS would block this and show an alert to the user. But since the dynamic library is running within the Zoom process space, I was able to run, no alerts, capture the picture of my lovely dog. She's actually the brains behind all of this. So let me just pop over and show some of the code and examples for that second attack. Unfortunately, I was going to do a live demo, but we're using Zoom for this. And so to do this, I would have had to, restart Zoom and then kill this session. But it's kind of funny because I'm actually proxying this. I ran this attack right before I joined the Zoom call to present this to you all. And so this instance of Zoom actually has an instance of my malicious dynamic library running and is doing all the proxying. So I actually never tested it fully. I mean, I ran the app and I was like, hey, yeah, nothing crashes. But this was kind of an end-to-end, the first end-to-end test of the proxying. And then, so far appears so good. So this is the dynamic library. This is the constructor. Constructor will be automatically invoked anytime the by a piece of malware in the background in this hidden kind of version. This code inside the dynamic library will get loaded. So we just print out a message, and then we instantiate a video snap object. This is just some standard code I wrote to capture video and audio off the webcam. So if we look at the compiler directives, the linkers, we can see here we have the xlinker and the /re-export library command that I specified earlier. And then once we copy this into Zoom's application bundle, this dynamic library will get automatically loaded. And if we go over to console here, we can see that Zoom did load this dynamic library, and the print statement that we saw was displayed to the screen, confirming that it was loaded. I think if I come over here, no, this is another window. And then once it's loaded by Zoom, obviously, as we talked about, it can access the mic and the webcam. And of course, do anything else that Zoom does, right? It's running in the address context of Zoom, so it has access to anything that Zoom has. And just to reiterate, the way this was all possible was because of this disable library validation key that Zoom, for some unknown reason, added to their application. It's basically an exception to the hardened runtime that tells Apple, yes, I want to opt into the hardened runtime, but I'm okay letting any third-party code running in my address space. So if you want to look for other vulnerable applications, either look for applications that are not compiled with the hardened runtime or have this exception in entitlement. And then this means you can load arbitrary dilibs into their process space. And if that application does something interesting or has some access that you want, for example, access to the mic, the webcam, keychain, user photos, access to the network, et cetera, you gain access. So this is actually a very powerful technique that goes way beyond Zoom, because first and foremost, it's kind of a great way to get persistence, right? Say you can do this to some browser. Anytime a user starts the browser, your dynamic code will get run as well. So if you're a backdoor or an implant, this is a very stealthy way to gain access and persistence, right? You're not going to show up as a new process. You're not creating a new launch daemon, a new launch agent. It's very difficult to detect against this. And then again, imagine, just a great way to get into applications. If the browser, for example, or Zoom is able to access the firewall or has a rule to get through the firewall, you are running in that process context, you will also be able to get that access. So I'm really surprised attackers don't make more use of this dilib proxying attack scenario because it's very stealthy and very powerful and affords you a lot of capabilities, a lot of access. Now, the good news is, I don't just break things. I also write free security tools that can help protect against this. So the first one is oversight. Oversight will tell you anytime the mic or the webcam is activated, regardless of what permissions it has and if Apple has approved it. So this could potentially detect the attack scenario where the a malware took Zoom and is running it in the background with an injected dilib to access the mic and the webcam. Of course, it will show up as Zoom, but imagine you don't expect Zoom to be running and your mic is on via this attack. You will be alerted. Another tool I write is Knock Knock. This enumerates for persistence, and last few years, it's also had the ability to detect these proxy dilibs. So if an attacker is using this proxy dilib, attack to thwart Zoom or any other application to either stealthily gain persistence or install a backdoor and implant. Knock knock can generically find these proxy dilibs. And so here, for example, after I installed my proxy dilib to subvert Zoom, ran knock knock, we can see it detects that there's this proxy dilib that's unsigned, unknown by VirusTotal. And obviously, if you were a forensics investigator at this point or malware analyst, you should take a closer look at that dilib to make sure it's or figure out exactly what it is. So that is a wrap. I believe we have a few minutes for some questions. So if there's any questions, we can chat about any of this.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the question was like, we can obviously tell that Patrick pre-recorded this presentation. So if you have any question, we have the proof it's live,
Yeah, no, it's live, 100%. No, I've just dosed so many of these that it works. No, and the VM is not a recording. That was live. Like I said, I really wanted to demo the injection attack, but I realized right before starting this, I was like, oh wait, I'm going to be using Zoom. So if I restart this, it's going to be problematic. So no,
if you make it crash, that could be quite funny though.
I would be amused, but I think all the users would be like, and there goes Patrick.
No, that's fine. Before we get any question in the chat, how long did it take again for Zoom to fix those vulnerabilities? I remember they were pretty quick, no?
Yeah, and that's actually something I want to focus. So thanks for bringing that up, because Zoom did an amazing job patching these bugs. So I posted the details of these bugs on the blog. I hadn't disclosed them to Zoom. My justification or my reasoning was that these were local vulnerabilities issues. So an attacker would obviously have to have already have some access to the system. Also, I really just wanted to bring broader awareness to Zoom's lack of privacy and security. And I think myself and other security researchers that were pointing out these flaws did a really good job driving that home. And to Zoom's credit, they fixed both of these bugs and a myriad of other bugs reported by other security researchers in one day. I mean, that's incredible. Like, for a vendor's point of view, that's amazing. Not only that, they very proactively really took a step back and said, hey, we now fully understand we have privacy and a security problem. Like, we understand, unfortunately, we didn't prioritize that from the beginning. You can't blame them too much, right? Silicon Valley startups, the goal is to basically gain the most possible number of users so that you become very important and widespread, and then be acquired or IPO and make billions of dollars. And so the problem with that approach is, that's the best way to make a lot of money, but it really puts security and privacy on the back seat. Because imagine a company spends 3 months on a new version of a product and says, hey, there's no new features, nothing's changed, but this version is more secure. Like, customers and users just are not going to care. So, Zoom and all these other companies prioritize new features. Hey, look, we have new emojis, and users are like, oh my God, I want that. And they will upgrade or pay for those new features. These companies make more money, get more users. And meanwhile, security and privacy really kind of is just an afterthought or no thought at all. Zoom, though, really kind of took a step back at this point and said, hey, we really need to focus on security and privacy. And so what they promised to do is a feature freeze, put all engineering resources on security and privacy issues. Amazing. Bring in third-party security researchers, do pen tests, improve their bug bounty program, have an external CISO board reviewing a lot of their decisions. So, moving forward, I'm very optimistic that Zoom will get their act together. And I think they're doing this not just because it's best for their users, but it's also what's best for them, right? They're
definitely
potentially losing customers because privacy and security is important to a lot of companies. So the good thing is by them now making security and privacy a priority, that's really a win-win, right? End users around the world will have a more secure product, and Zoom will get more companies and clients. So kudos to Zoom for really taking this seriously, and moving forward, I'm very optimistic that they will really kind of get their act together in terms of security and privacy.
Yeah, it's true. The response so far has been pretty good, because I think it was your blog post, the other one about the UNC path. I think the article from The Intercept also which was based from the Citizen Lab blog post, I think, about the encryption. I think they're getting a lot of hit at the moment, so they definitely need to show that they are investing internally on security.
Yeah, and like I said, I think they are. The CEO reached out to me personally, thanking me for my finding. Actually have a Zoom meeting with him later today. And so as a security researcher, like that really like floored me, because first and foremost, you know, when you report bugs or post bugs on your blogs, vendors usually, you know, either ignore you or, you know, threaten legal action, or, you know, the CEO never, let's just say Apple has never responded as like positively as Zoom knows. So so that was eye-opening, and like I said, so I think I'm moving forward. I'm very optimistic that
that's
Zoom
pretty awesome.
definitely improve their security and privacy posture. So again, really, it shows a lot of emotional maturity from Zoom's point of view. So just kudos again to them.
Yeah, definitely. Some more questions from the chat. Do you think Zoom hired former Slayer creators? I'm not sure what's Slayer. If so, is it a modern way to make your career path in cybersec?
So Slayer is a popular piece of adware, malware, and the way it elevates its privileges is by showing an authentication prompt. So I doubt it. The unfortunate reality is that API is just very commonly used because one, it was kind of the recommended approach by Apple. And unfortunately, the more modern APIs that Apple provides to securely perform privileged or elevated actions are incredibly complicated. You have to set up an XBC service, and you have to it installs a launch daemon that then you have to manually uninstall. You can't pass command line arguments. Like, it's totally doable, and it is secure. It's just a ton of work and very difficult. So this everyone generally defaults back to this auth execute with privileges API, because it's just so much simpler to use. So that's malware authors and also developers. So I don't think Zoom hired the malware authors. I mean, I don't know. I don't know who the malware authors are, but we see a lot of legitimate companies. I mean, Chrome for a long time utilized this API too, and they still might. They said it was a not. They basically said it's a won't fix when I reported it, because they said the alternatives are not valid. Sparkle, the very popular update platform that a lot of applications are compiled with, I believe still does as well. So unfortunately, it's very widespread.
Awesome. Another question: is it possible to detect Apple's use of MRT client side or over the network?
Yeah. So MRT is Apple's malware removal tool. It's interesting to monitor for a variety of reasons. First, Apple a lot of times detects new malware and doesn't tell anyone about it. You don't really share this with the antivirus community or security researchers, which I personally think is a really poor approach. I mean, sharing is caring, kind of all in this together.
Yeah.
So one way to get information about, not at all. That's a separate topic though. Stay focused, Patrick. So MRT is great to monitor because a lot of times you can gain insight into the signatures in the malware that Apple knows about by monitoring that. Also, in the case of Zoom, the fact that they use this technology to basically remove legitimate third-party code is super interesting.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the easiest way to monitor MRT for updates is basically to monitor the binary itself, because actually Apple compiles the signature into the MRT binary. And so if the binary changes, there's a new version change, it's a good idea to basically pop it in a disassembler and start looking through that. So, you know, you can set a watch path on that, or have a file monitor running, basically looking for updates. The other thing I think you can do is you can ping Apple's update catalog, and they have the latest version. And so just make a web request, and if that version changes, you know that there's been an update. Now, in terms of monitoring its activity on the system, that's difficult because there's not like an MRT log file. It doesn't say, hey, I just removed Zoom. I believe there's some diagnostic logs you can dig around and find, but you know, Apple barely likes to admit the existence of MRT because it acknowledges that there's malware running on the system. And if they use it to do things like remove Zoom, that's not something they want to talk about either. Yeah. So this is why generally it's difficult to monitor both for updates and to monitor its activities. But yeah, it would be great if Apple provided a little more transparency here, because you can imagine a Mac sysadmin wanting to know, hey, are there any systems on my network that, MRT detected and removed malware for? I think that's a very valid question. But unfortunately, I don't see Apple changing their course on that. But I'll keep bugging them about it.
Yeah. Well, I still never got my, like the signing certificate for my driver, but so I pretty much gave up to do anything with Apple.
I know. I mean, memory forensics, very, very important. But they're just like, no.
But it's dead now. Like they killed all the kernel extensions anyway. So.
Yeah, they did. And we see attackers using in-memory only attacks and exploits, and this third-party security tools. Like, there's literally no way to detect that. And to me, that's mind-blowing that techniques that attackers are publicly utilizing, that Apple has basically taken away the capabilities of security tools to detect and thwart that. Mind-blowing. But Apple knows best.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for joining us, Patrick. It was really awesome to have you here. Tonight, I guess this morning for you, and it's still like early morning in a way. But yeah, thanks, awesome. Also, it's great to have you speaking at OpCode again, because unlike Ryan, would decline some of the invitation before, or build on some invitation. You actually spoke at OpCode in Dubai. It's great to have you back.
And I got to ride camels. I was really excited about that.
Yeah, I remember I saw your pictures. It was pretty cool. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I just want to say thanks again for organizing this, both in the past, amazing conference. Any of you listening, OpCode's an amazing conference, both to attend and speak at. Dubai, great place to visit. And Matt, I know how much work goes on organizing a conference, making sure everyone shows up when they say they will. So thank you too for organizing this and making it available online, because I think as researchers, the bugs we find, I think that's interesting, but us being able to disseminate that information to a broader audience, I think really moves the security of platforms and products forward. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to you. The format is going to be like every 2 weeks anyway. Like the next edition is going to be 22nd of April. So yeah.
Can I come back?
if you want to, if you have anything to talk about, like Costin is actually coming back. He's probably going to do a fire chat with David actually. Like we'll see. Like it's still a discussion, but it's just happening in the chat, So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks again. And everyone who's watching, mahalo, really appreciate it. And hopefully when this is all over, we'll all grab beers and reconnect in person, IRL.
Awesome. Take care. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Bye.
Well, hi everyone, and welcome back. So this is finished for today. So we're pretty much done for today. I hope you enjoyed today's edition. Like I was saying before, let me just pull that slide quickly. But yeah, the next edition is going to be on the 2nd of April. And 22nd of April, sorry. And if you want to speak, if you have anything to speak at, the CFP is still open. There's the link on the website. If you have any recommendation for a speaker, do not hesitate to reach out. Format is going to be the same, so Alpha Day, because it's morning time, on the West Coast, and here it's not too late. Alpha Day every 2 weeks, and it's then slides on YouTube, slides on GitHub, and then the presentation will be cut and pushed on YouTube also after. Any comments or feedback for next edition or this edition? I see there's a lot of people coming back from last edition. Well, thanks again for the support. First of all, I know a lot of you are watching for a bit everywhere. Whichever country you're from, don't hesitate to just type it in the chat. It's also good to have some visibility on where you are connecting from. One of the things also that came out today is the need to to have a better platform to communicate our ideas. And since now there is no conferences, so I think moving virtual that makes sense. And a bunch of I'm sure we're gonna see a bunch of virtual conferences pretty much soon. but also to have a place where we can archive like all the research that you know, like that we all have to present. I think is also pretty important because everything is a bit scattered like everywhere, and because also like now like because of the pandemic, a lot of like research topics are like moving very quickly also. So it's pretty good, I think, in my own opinion, to have like a platform where you don't need to wait for 3 months, you know, to get an answer from a CFP and then get to present also. So I think overall it may even be like a you know, pretty good like a platform too, because then you have like the blog posts that are like pretty good, but sometimes, you know, it's also good to have an actual like a video presentation where you can speak about things. But yeah, like you can either like reach out to me directly, privately, you know, just like ping me on Twitter if you have any comments. Yeah, don't hesitate to use like the hashtag #UpCode2020. Juan, if you're watching, I think if I had any prize to give away today, I think you would be receiving that prize for being the most active person on social media and supporting the conference. So thanks to you, Juan. Thanks to all the speakers today. So for speaking today. So Ryan, Sarah, Grok, Brian, Costin, and Patrick. Thanks again for accepting to speak. Also on such a short notice. I know it's not very common either, but I think overall we have like some pretty good content today. Yeah, so Matt, what do you use to stream live on YouTube? I'm using like some like streamer software called OBS. It's usually used by gamers, so you can also do conferences with it. But yeah, and yeah, any questions? I see everyone is saying like good things. Cool. Yeah, thanks again, and I guess that's it for today. Bye, everyone.
Social distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to APTs Virtual.